Chapter 235. First there was silver. 12 million silver taels and silver notes and 2 million gold taels and gold notes. Just these two transactions alone were already a considerable amount of loot. Moreover, this was only the most ordinary harvest. Mystical stones, 3,700 pieces. Mystical crystals, 600 pieces. Mystical pills, 356 pieces of 5th grade mystical pills, 75 pieces of 6th grade mystical pills, 18 pieces of 7th grade mystical pills, and even 2 top-notch 8th grade mystical pills. Beautiful jade, 175 pieces. Yunyang opened a secret door at the corner of the secret chamber and realized that it was filled with all sorts of exotic treasures and treasures of heaven and earth. Yunyang was rather puzzled by this. This was only the Four Seasons Towers Hall of 7 Months Vice Hall Leader. Why did it feel like he had captured Supreme Lord Springfrost? Could a mere Hall of 7 Months Vice Hall Leader really have such great authority and be able to collect so many treasures? It was a little too frightening. As there were so many items that he could not carry them all, Yunyang had given most of them to Emmy instead. He had made an exception this time, allowing Emmy to eat to its heart's content. Aya, Emmy was overjoyed, absorbing the energy within. It was only the time it took to brew 2 cups of tea, but Emmy had already absorbed the essence of the materials, leaving only piles of residue and powder on the spot. There were still plenty of exotic metals in the loot. Other than 30 to 40 pieces that Yunyang could identify, there were at least 17 to 18 pieces that he had never seen before. Bring all of these back and see how Baishua performs. If he's good, give them to him. Yunyang thought. If he doesn't, Finally, Yunyang plucked all the luminous pearls embedded in the walls of the secret chamber like he was plucking a feather. When the secret chamber turned into darkness, Yunyang turned into the wind and left, returning with a bountiful haul. This trip was truly a fruitful one. Other than Emmy, who was swaying its head from eating, constantly in a state where it wanted to burp, Yunyang had snuck out with a huge backpack on his back. The huge backpack had been connected using a few bedsheets from Shinyusher's house to gather all of the loot. These were all leftovers from Emmy's meal. Other than those whose levels were too high for Yunyang to bear to let Emmy eat, Emmy refused to eat the rest. However, to Yunyang, whether they were of a high or low level, they were all good stuff. Everything else aside, just the banknotes and gold notes alone. If 1 million taels could kill Supreme Lord Springfrost, perhaps 10 million taels could kill Mr. Nyen? One must have the courage to think. What if they succeeded? Fortunately, it was already the 4th watch period. When Yunyang returned home, Lao Mei and Fang Mafei hurried over to help when they saw Supreme Yun returning home in such a humiliating manner. As for the great swordsman in white robes, he did not care about such a small matter, merely scanning it with his deific consciousness. Yunyang was glad that he did not come, glad that he did not see anything. If great swordsman Bai saw that there were so many suitable sword chi for him to cultivate, what if he shamelessly snatched them? I can't beat him now. There was no knowing what was in a man's heart. He had to be on guard. He then called Shui Wuyin over. Once Shui Wuyin saw that Yunyang had brought back so many items, he knew at once that Yunyang's trip had gone smoothly. Look at these papers. Yunyang shoved about half a sack of items to Shui Wuyin. Check carefully to see if there's anything valuable inside. Shui Wuyin was caught off guard and almost stumbled from the slap. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Yunyang's joyful cry, "Ah, my little sweethearts are back. Meow meow meow, meow. Meow, meow meow meow," for snow-white fur balls that were all palm-sized kittens charged over happily and hopped onto Yunyang. Shui Wuyin immediately realized that he had nowhere to put his hands on now. There was one crouching on each of Yunyang's shoulders, one on top of his head, one hanging on his waist, and another hanging behind his buttocks. Yunyang laughed heartily as he hugged them in his arms. "You've all worked hard this trip. Come, I'll prepare something delicious for all of you. I'll reward all of you well. Let this horse fellow do the hard work, let's go play." After saying that, he took the few little pom-poms and swaggered off, leaving in a carefree and unrestrained manner. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei were not surprised as they sorted the treasures Yunyang had brought back into the storage room and stored them properly. Shui Wuyin, on the other hand, was speechless. "You're ordering me around like a worker. You're really impolite." After a sigh, Shui Wuyin returned to his room with the pile of papers that he did not know what had been written on them, studying them one by one. This was a meticulous task. Shui Wuyin felt that there was probably no one more suitable than him in this world. However, the 9 heavens dictum still needed to be dispatched. Right now Yunyang was cultivating. The cultivation this time was very different from the past. Emmy had eaten its fill during the incident earlier and was in an unprecedentedly joyous mood. The spiritual qi it exuded was unprecedentedly abundant as well, so much so that it was unstoppable. 4 eclipse panthers and a lightning cat snuggled into Yun-Yang's embrace. All 5 critters were safe and sound. Yun-Yang could clearly feel the 5 little fellows' bellies against his skin, rising and falling with their breaths. It was probably a warm and comfortable atmosphere. Yun-Yang had also entered a deep recuperation state. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th whiteys had suffered internal injuries of varying degrees during the ambush. If they had relied on the self-recovery of high-level mystical beasts, they would have to recuperate for at least a few months. They were still young beasts after all, so their self-recovery mechanisms were slightly different. However, with Emmy's relentless outpouring of qi of vitality, they had all recovered within an hour. Then, the 5 whiteys shed their fur at the same time. Yun-Yang sat cross-legged as he cultivated. He did not know that his body had been submerged by the whitey shedding layer after layer of white fur. He only felt that the mystical qi in his cultivation today was unusually active. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged into his meridians and swiftly gathered in his dantian. The speed of the process was unimaginably fast. The qi of vitality that gushed out from his deific consciousness was also forcefully flushing his meridians. The mystical spiritual qi from the Kirin fish was also expanding his meridians. With these layers of assistance, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged over like a tidal wave. It gathered above the residence of Yun and disappeared in an instant, only to be replaced by another mass. That night, Shui Wuyin and Bai Yixue had only started cultivating after noticing that the atmosphere around them was not right. Although they had benefited considerably, it was far from what the other two could compare to. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei had seen this situation many times, so they naturally chose to drop everything at once and devote themselves to cultivating wholeheartedly. The sun was high up in the sky. Tiantang City was, of course, bathed in sunlight at this time of the day. In spite of this, the sky above the residence of Yun was shrouded in fog, blurring one's vision. It was a peculiar sight caused by the massive amount of spiritual qi that had been attracted to this place. Lao Mei, who had cultivated for an entire night, felt the meridians in his body expanding to their limits, as if his body was about to explode. Suddenly, a long howl resounded, as if it could pierce through the clouds and split the sky. The bones all over his body crackled and popped. When Lao Mei finally opened his eyes, his long hair billowed as 2 beams of light shot out from his eyes. 8th peak breakthrough. Fang Mafei, on the other hand, was also brimming with green qi. He had already accumulated to the limit of 8th peak pinnacle. He was only a step away from the 9th peak. He only needed to wait for another opportunity and he could break through to the 9th peak realm. Bai Yixue was astonished as well because his cultivation base had improved by leaps and bounds overnight, benefiting a lot from it. Putting everything else aside, he had expected that he would need at least a few days to recover from his remaining internal injuries. Unexpectedly, he had completely recovered in the blink of an eye. Then, in the face of the tsunami-like spiritual qi, even the great swordsman Bai, who had a super-high cultivation base, had a strange feeling that the spiritual qi was directly poured into his body before he could digest it. Was this still considered training? This was obviously a trend of advancing while lying down. This place was indeed marvelous with so many opportunities. Bai Yixue's experience, cultivation base and knowledge far surpassed Lao Mei, Fang Mafei, and even Yun-Yang himself. Of course he would not miss such a rare opportunity. He squeezed the space in his dantian with all his might, seizing the opportunity to improve his cultivation base. After all, with his profound cultivation base, it would be difficult for him to improve even an inch without decades of hard work. Bai Yixue had an extravagant hope for his current state. If he could continue, he might be able to break through the limit of perfection and reach the next level, the realm of a heaven mystic. If that was the case, even if he still could not defeat Jun Moyan, he would still have some confidence in moving up 2 or 3 places on the swordsman leaderboard and into the top 3. Bai Yixue's body was covered in a purple mist. He was really absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth with all his might now. Perhaps he was fighting with his life on the line. Shui Wuyin was also absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth with all his might. Although he did not know where the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had come from, he would not miss such a godsend opportunity. As a member of the Eldar tribe, especially when his innate talent was lacking, it was more difficult than ascending to heaven for him to improve his cultivation base. The intensity of the spiritual qi and the air of vitality had given Shui Wuyin, who had long given up on cultivation, a strong sense of hope. He did not ask for much today. As long as he was able to heal his innate defect, he would be satisfied. As the sun rose higher, the commotion caused by the people grew louder. The fog in the courtyard slowly dissipated as well, clinging to the flowers and grass. Finally, Yun-yang felt as if his meridians, blood vessels, and bones were about to burst his body. He finally woke up amidst the excruciating pain. "Emmy?" Yun-yang huffed angrily as he panted with lingering fear. It was only then that Emmy realized that it had almost gotten into trouble again. It shrunk its branches, leaves, and vines, revealing only a tiny sprout as it peeked its head out. It actually looked embarrassed. And it. Chapter 236. Yun-yang's eyes widened, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Emmy had eaten too much last night and was overly excited. The air of vitality it exuded had far exceeded Yun-yang's expectations. It was not just 1 or 2 times more but dozens of times more. The result of such an unexpected situation was that it had led to everyone's collective advancement. Yun-yang was the one who was most dissatisfied with the current situation. He had just broken through to the 6th peak of mystical chi 3 days ago. Although he had spent all his energy exploring these 3 days, his accumulation was shallow due to his lack of actual combat experience. He had only sparred with Lao Mei and Fang Mafei a few times. It was far from consolidating his foundation and stabilizing his current realm. The only real battle he had had was the one with Shen Yushan the night before. It was under such circumstances that Yun-yang, who was the direct beneficiary, still advanced from the 6th peak beginner mystical chi to intermediate level, ace, pinnacle, and then broke through to the 7th peak. He even advanced all the way to the 7th peak intermediate level. It would not be an exaggeration to describe his progress as skyrocketing. It was just that the advancement had caught Yun-yang off guard. Yun-yang thought in exasperation. It looked like his sparring sessions with Lao Mei and Fang Mafei would have to be faster and more brutal. He might even have to challenge Bai Yishui or something. Otherwise, he would not be able to make up for the step-by-step experience. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt. Yun-yang spat out forcefully. "What the hell is this?" A ball of white fur had actually come out of his mouth. Yun-yang looked down. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. *CKME. Yun-yang was tall. Although he was sitting cross-legged, he still had a considerable height. His entire body was almost buried by the fine white fur. Who knew how many times the 5 whiteys had shed their fur last night to accumulate to such an extent? Although Yun-yang was covered in white fur, even his nose and mouth had white fur seeping into it, he did not feel too repulsed by it. It was because each strand of white fur that had shed from the 5 whiteys was glistening with a delicate luster. According to Yun-yang's judgment, if he were to collect these white fur and use them as raw materials to make something, the quality would be extraordinary. It was a pity that Yun-yang did not have any talent in this field around him, so he could only sigh helplessly at the waist. He looked at the 5 whiteys in his arms and saw that they had all turned into smooth red meatballs. His little belly was still moving up and down and he was sleeping soundly. In short, his condition was very good. Yun-yang sucked in a deep breath and channeled his mystical skill, carefully feeling the extreme agitation of his mystical chi. He felt that his meridians were circulating smoothly and his dantian was surging like the tide. He was in a great state. After all, the little ones had not woken up yet. If he were to move and wake them up, affecting their transformation or interrupting some mysterious evolution, it would be too much of a loss. Therefore, no matter how much he wanted to verify the progress of his ability, he only cultivated slightly and remained motionless, waiting for the 5 whiteys to wake up naturally. Lao Mei had made another breakthrough and was extremely excited. He jumped up and down, running back and forth in the courtyard as joyful as a child. He was already old, his meridians were already set and it would be difficult for him to break through. Now, however, it was as if he had been reborn and had the capital to move towards a higher goal. How could he not be excited? Shui Wuyin, Bai Yishui, and Fang Mafei stood quietly under the flowering trees in the courtyard, studying the yard that was almost foreign to them. The courtyard was still the same as before, but the scenery inside the courtyard, how could it change so much in one night? The flowers and trees that were planted in the courtyard were originally very ordinary, but now they were no less than 2 feet tall, and the crown of the trees was more than twice as large. Initially, it had only covered half of the pavilion, but now the canopy hung down like a dome, covering the entire pavilion beneath it. The 4 sides were even more than that. Other than the flowering trees in the yard, the weeds on the ground had changed even more, all of them growing taller than a person. The path that had been trampled on was now covered in a new shade of green. To be more specific, the small drill ground where everyone had been sparring yesterday had now turned into a grassland. The grass was ankle-deep. Moreover, the feeling of stepping on them was tender and soft, and he almost couldn't bear to trample on these budding lives. In just one night, the entire yard seemed to have undergone a drastic change. Yun Yang's small yard had only been planted with a few green vines at the base of the wall. They had only covered half of the wall. Looking at it now, the entire yard, from the four walls to the roof, was now covered with green vines. It was a sea of lush green vitality. Dewdrops were rolling on the grass, leaves and petals. As the breeze blew, the rich fragrance of plants wafted through the air. It was already the winter season of the 11th month, but the fragrance of flowers wafted through the air. The ordinary residence of Yun's yard was like a fairyland on earth, filled with boundless vitality. As the three of them looked on, their eyes were filled with fascination. Such a vibrant and beautiful scene was rare in November. Even if it was a warm winter this year and the strong cold weather had yet to arrive, the surroundings were already bleak. How could there be such a scene? However, surprises came one after another. When Yun Yang finally walked out, even the calm and composed Shui Wuyin was dumbfounded. What was going on? How did the eldest become a white-haired man when he was cultivating? What kind of strange cultivation method was this? What was the use of cultivating it? The white fur on his body was fluttering everywhere. Yun Yang could not care less about the others' astonished gazes. He began to tidy himself up quickly. As a gust of mystical chi rose, the white fur on his body flew up at once. With a light wave of his hand, a gentle breeze spun and gathered all the white fur into a ball in the blink of an eye. Yun Yang then tossed the ball into the room. 5 tiny heads popped out from Yun Yang's embrace, blinking dreamily. Meow meow meow, the 5 whiteys' bodies were still smooth and red. They were licking their naked bodies with their tiny tongues. It was obvious that none of them were used to their current state. Why were they suddenly naked? Let's do a magic trick. Yun Yang grabbed the top of one of the whiteys and tossed it out. This fellow, whose luck was unknown, was Big Whitey. Big Whitey meowed, meow. Suddenly, it flipped in the air and a layer of long white fur grew on its naked body. It landed on the ground like a pom-pom and rolled around in the emerald green grass. The 4 of them watched with widened eyes. Just by tossing it away, all its fur had grown back? Was this really a magic trick? Swoosh. Another whitey's was tossed out. It was covered in fur as well, snorting in dissatisfaction before it went to Big Whitey and rolled around. The other 3 whiteys did the same, returning to their original forms. The 5 bundles of fur balls rolled around on the ground, looking extremely adorable. The scene was truly adorable. In spite of this, Yun Yang noticed that the intelligence in the 5 fellows' eyes had increased. Their gazes were filled with intimacy and adoration. Yun Yang felt a sense of accomplishment. The 5 whitey lightning cats were considered to have been reborn and had greatly surpassed the lightning cat's innate shackles. Yun Yang would not be surprised if they could break through to the level of a 7th-level mystical beast in the future. Just the fact that Whitey 5 had shrunk again after its advancement and was still a small white cat that weighed 3 to 4 catties was enough to tell the story. Although it was still slightly bigger than the Eclipse Panther cub, the difference in size was no longer obvious. As for the 4 Eclipse Panthers, Yun Yang was even more satisfied. Emmy had changed the foundation of these 4 fellows once again, increasing their potential. Yun Yang believed that each of these 4 fellows could advance to 9th-level pinnacle mystical beasts. Moreover, this conclusion was only limited to these 4 little fellows. It stopped at the current foundation. Who knew how many times they could go through similar baptisms of origin chi if they stayed by Yun Yang's side? Their ultimate achievement would be truly limitless, unimaginable. There was something else that interested Yun Yang more about the 4 whiteys. After this evolution, the 4 Eclipse Panthers had returned to their natural state. As long as the 4 little fellows did not reveal themselves intentionally and maintain their current size, it would be extremely rare to find someone who could recognize their true identity, if not the only one. This was the unique concealment ability of 9th-level pinnacle mystical beasts. Fang Mafei walked over, his eyes filled with surprise as he looked at the 4 whiteys and asked in a low voice, "Young master, these 4 fellows, are they?" Yun Yang answered, "They have indeed improved a little, but they haven't truly matured yet. They're still far from the stage where they can roam the world and dominate an area." Roam the world and dominate an area. Fang Mafei understood the progress of these fellows at once. He sucked in a deep breath, his eyes filled with awe. Yun Yang's evaluation was a little too humble. With the 4 whiteys' current strength, any one of them alone would be at the level of an 8th-level beginner mystical beast. Furthermore, the Eclipse Panther's innate movement speed had been enhanced by Emmy to an unbelievable level, allowing it to go anywhere in the world. For some reason, Amy was biased towards the 5 little fellows, sparing no effort to elevate their attributes. Looks like these 5 fellows are the ones who have benefited the most this time. Yun-Yang smiled and shook his head. The 5 fur balls rolled on the ground for a while before Big Whitey suddenly straightened its body, its ears twitching as it looked at the sun in the sky, its eyes squinting into a line. It walked a circle on the ground with its elegant cat-like steps and licked the other Whiteys. The 4 little guys sat motionlessly, and only their ears twitched as they stared at Big Whitey. Meow! Big Whitey meowed and suddenly turned into a ray of white light, dashing out of the residence of Yun's wall and vanishing in an instant. The other 4 little fellows were still sitting motionlessly, their eyes fixed on the direction that Big White had left in, and their tails were all standing straight up at the same time. After a long time they drooped. One of the Whiteys came to Yun-Yang with the same elegant cat-like steps and tugged at Yun-Yang's robe with a tiny paw. It raised its head to look at Yun-Yang. There was an obvious questioning look in its eyes. Yun-Yang felt like his heart was about to melt as he laughed and said, "Go look for it if you miss it. As long as you complete your daily training, you can go play with it anytime in your free time." Once they heard him, the 4 fellows leaped in joy, scurrying around in the air and meowing. Baishua's eyes widened. "They can actually understand what you're saying?" Looking at the 4 seemingly ordinary lightning cats, Baishua was perplexed. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it to be true. So what if they can understand? Yun-Yang snorted and said, "I still have to send them to school after some time. Even if I let them learn the ways of being an official, it's still better than these fellows who know nothing but chatter, infighting, framing, and fighting for fame and fortune. Let them learn more. At least when the enemy comes in, these fellows can fight until the last moment." Baishua rolled his eyes and walked away. He felt that talking to such a crazy guy was really lowering his own style. "We need to do something tonight." Yun-Yang looked at Lao Mei and Fang Mafei. When the 2 of them heard this, their faces revealed an expression of eagerness to try. They had not gone out on a mission for such a long time and had been cultivating non-stop. Their bodies were almost rusty. "Fang Mafei, I need you to do something beforehand for this." Yun-Yang leaned close to Fang Mafei's ear and whispered. Fang Mafei was stunned for a moment before he almost laughed out loud. He said, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this to me. There won't be any problems. Wayne, stay at the residence of Yun. Just do what you have to do, no need to care about anything else. Everything will go according to the plan we've agreed on." Yun-Yang looked at Shui Wuyin. "Still be careful. Don't ask for merit, just don't make mistakes," Shui Wuyin added. Looking at Shui Wuyin, Yun-Yang suddenly thought of something and said in a low voice, "Wuyin, let me ask you something." "What is it?" Shui Wuyin asked. "If I were to capture someone, you..." Yun-Yang said slowly. Before he could finish, Shui Wuyin understood what he meant and said, "It's not a problem to torture them for 2 to 3 months or even longer. However, if you want to interrogate them, they have to be in the form of a deific consciousness." Yun-Yang rolled his eyes and said angrily, "Those who are in the form of a deific consciousness are almost at Ling Xiaozui's level. Can I capture them? What you said is as good as not saying anything." Shui Wuyin said sheepishly, "This can't be helped. My cultivation base isn't there yet. If I were to reach the stage where my soul can leave my body and roam the moon..." Yun-Yang pointed at him and said, "Stop, you'd better go and settle those things. Those are serious matters. If you had the stage where your soul could leave your body and your soul could roam the moon, wouldn't you be at Ling Xiaozui's level? You could just kill them head on. Why would you need to interrogate them and practice nonsense?" Shui Wuyin left in embarrassment. Tonight there were 2 targets. Chapter 237. However, these 2 targets could only be attacked at night. There was not much to do during the day, so Yun-Yang left leisurely. Today seemed to be the day to ease His Majesty's nerves again. With his current cultivation that had advanced by leaps and bounds, he should be able to make the Emperor feel more comfortable. As for the poison, he should be able to suppress it a little more. Shen Yusher's sudden disappearance and the strange secret chamber that appeared in his house had, of course, attracted the intense attention of Yutong's higher-ups. However, His Majesty and Qiu Jianhan were well aware that the 9 Heavens Dictum's news had arrived. Shen Yusher, the 4 Seasons Tower 7 Moons Vice Hall Master, involved in the murder of the 9 Supremes, the evidence is conclusive. His Majesty sighed deeply. "Old Qiu, what kind of organization do you think the 4 Seasons Tower is?" "Oh." His Majesty was speechless, his fingers trembling as he counted them one by one. "Starting from Wu Wenyuan until now, how many has this been? My ministers in the imperial court find such a thing every few days. and then another one every few days. Is this still my empire of Yutong? It has become the Four Seasons Tower's word now. His Majesty was unprecedentedly frustrated, about to go mad. It would have been fine if I had found out about this myself. I would have beheaded these bastards in public and exterminated their families, but I didn't. If it wasn't for the Nine Heavens Dictum's help, who knows how long these people could have stayed hidden? Qiu Jianhan chuckled humorlessly and said, Your Majesty, if we had found out about this, perhaps the trouble would have been even greater. The wrinkles on his face deepened. The martial world's affairs, the martial world's? His Majesty scoffed and said, What martial world's affairs? Their murder of the Nine Supremes is equivalent to severing the Empire of Yutong's national destiny. How can this still be considered a martial world affair? Wu Wenyuan, Shen Yushi, and the rest are all important officials of the Empire. Can they be considered martial world visitors? Qiu Jianhan sighed and said, Your Majesty, the difference between the imperial court and the common people is no longer clear now. The forces of the martial world have already grown. He sighed and didn't know how to comfort her. All under the heavens belong to the king, and all who lived on the land belong to the king. This was the foundation of a country, and it was also the most basic life creed of a king. And the principle of using martial arts to break the law was something that all those in power feared. However, after so many years, the various forces, sects, and gangs in the martial world not only refused to submit to the rule of the king, but also grew stronger and stronger. It was no longer just a matter of being too big to deal with, it was an unshakable character. To the imperial power, this could be said to be a huge hindrance and a great threat. At the same time, it was a humiliation that was difficult to erase. And now, the various countries were at war with each other, restraining each other. They didn't have the time to deal with this Jianghu matter. There was something else that old Marshal Qiu did not say. If this went on for a long time, there would be some behemoth that could control the succession of imperial power, the change of dynasties, the rise and fall of the world. When that time came, the imperial power would be the true tragedy. It would be a situation that was sadder than the decline of the empire. To change this situation, the emperors of the various countries could only work together to set up the martial sciences and recruit the world's talents for their own use. Then they would have to spend a long period of time, perhaps even several generations of effort, to wear down the forces of the martial world bit by bit and bring them back under the imperial court's supervision. Only then could the situation be reversed and the forces of the martial world be digested completely. However, it was impossible for Yutong to carry out such a plan now. Once such a measure was implemented, it would definitely be strongly resisted by the civil officials. Even if the civil officials did not resist, it would be an unsolvable problem to keep the martial people in check when there were more of them. After all of this required a complete restructuring and reform to be possible. Looking at it now, it could be said to be completely hopeless and impossible. Old Qiu, how many people from the Four Seasons Tower do you think are left in the imperial court? His Majesty obviously knew that he was just grumbling. There was nothing he could do to change the current situation, so he changed the topic immediately. Qiu Jianhan sighed helplessly and said, Let's not talk about the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate goal of murdering the Nine Supremes. Let's talk about how the Four Seasons Tower could set up such a trap with accurate intelligence in all aspects. Not only did they need the help of the political higher-ups, they also needed the help of the military higher-ups. In addition, if there wasn't the middle-ranking military who passed the information and the participation of the royals in the process, it would be difficult to achieve such a seamless operation. Other than that, they probably needed the help of a considerable number of people from the lower ranks. Old Marshal Qiu sighed. To complete such a huge plan, it's obviously not enough to just dig out a few people now. That's why, before Marshal Qiu could finish, His Majesty had already sat down like a deflated ball. Qiu Jianhan's words were logical, straight to the point, and he had even given the conclusion that His Majesty did not want to hear. It was definitely not just these few people. There must be many more people. However, so what if he knew this? Even if he knew that there were many spies, he did not know who they were, let alone eradicate them. Your Majesty only needs to wait now. Now that the Nine Heavens Dictum is on the move, I believe that many of the targets have already been exposed. When someone from the Nine Supremes shows up, it'll be more than halfway through this matter. Everything will be clear by then, Qiu Jianhan comforted him. I, the Emperor, am actually so useless that I can only wait passively, unable to help at all? His Majesty murmured. Old Marshal Qiu could only sigh in response to His Majesty's self-deprecation. Help. How do you plan to help? We don't even know if the people we're sending are from the Four Seasons Tower. How can we even talk about helping? For a moment, both of them were speechless. It was not that they did not want to speak, but they really did not know what to say. They could not even find the right words to comfort the emperor. Therefore, when Yunyang arrived, he was greeted with such an unusually depressing scene. However, he did not say anything. There were some things that he could not ask as Marquis Yun's heir on the surface. Supreme Cloud could ask and even make decisions. However, Yunyang did not have the right to intervene. 20,000 miles away from Tiantang City. On top of a steep mountain, Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan were walking down with their guards. However, at this moment, only 18 of the nearly 100 guards who had returned from the Heavenly South region were left. Almost all of them were injured as well. As for their maids, not a single one of them could be seen. Yu Rulan was pale, her white robe stained with blood, while Ji Lingxi was panting, her face unnaturally flushed. Suddenly, the sound of flowing water came from the front. Everyone's eyes lit up. "There's a mountain spring?" Ji Lingxi cried out in surprise, licking her chapped lips. Everyone walked forward in a spurt of energy and found a small stream in the mountain. The water was extremely clean and clear. The group cheered, forgetting to keep their guard up as they pounced forward and drank the water in big gulps. "I can't walk anymore." Ji Lingxi sat down on a small tree, gasping for air. After drinking the water, she felt energized, but at the same time, she felt extremely exhausted. Yu Rulan's body swayed before she slowly sat down on a rock beside her. She was obviously exhausted as well. Of the 18 guards, except for the 2 leaders who forcefully supported their bodies and called out to the others to gather their water sacks and fill them with spring water one by one, the rest of the guards all sat on the ground and panted heavily. A few of them rested for a while before going downstream to wash their necessities. It was unrealistic to wash them completely at this point, so they could only wash the important items first. At this time, everyone's bellies were full of water. When they walked, they felt their stomachs shake. "Sister Lan?" Ji Lingxi's mask was long gone, revealing the dark face she had when she was in Tiantang City. Only her eyes were still as bright as snow. "I keep feeling that something isn't right along the way. It's really not right." Ji Lingxi panted and said, "Ever since we set off to search for my brother, we've traveled almost half of the continent in these few years, but we've never encountered such a situation. Such a relentless pursuit, it's not normal." Yu Rulan pondered for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, she coughed, a trickle of blood trickling down the corner of her lips, but she wiped it away quickly as if nothing had happened. She said, "It's not just not right. There are too many strange things along the way." Yu Rulan said, "Ever since we were separated from our sisters, we've been being pursued, ambushed, all sorts of traps and ambushes. We've sent a message to our families for help, but they haven't come even after such a long time. However, these people who've been pursuing us obviously don't want to kill us directly. They have another goal in mind. I wonder what their real purpose is." Yu Rulan said, "There's always a way for us to escape each time we're in a hopeless situation, but the losses we suffer each time are unavoidable. Every time we're lucky enough to escape, we'll suddenly realize that the direction we've been heading in isn't right. As long as we head towards Tiantang City or even its surroundings, we'll be pursued immediately. It's not a coincidence that the cycle repeats itself." Yu Rulan said, "There's obviously someone manipulating us from behind the scenes. If there's no other purpose, then they're toying and torturing us on purpose." A cold glint flashed in Yu Rulan's eyes. "This is very strange." Ji Lingxi said, "What Sister Lan means is that someone doesn't want us to return to Tiantang City?" Yu Rulan pondered and said, "Not necessarily. Perhaps there's some other reason behind this that we don't know about yet." There was a deep worry in her eyes. Suddenly, she asked thoughtfully, "Lingxi, how old is your younger brother this year?" Chapter 238. Disgust colored Ji Lingxi's face as she said, "He's 17 this year, 2 years younger than me." Yu Rulan hesitated and said, "My brother is 23 this year." Ji Lingxi frowned and said, "Sister Lan, I only have respect for your brother." Yu Rulan smiled and said, "Of course I know that." She seemed to want to say something, but the words did not leave her lips. She only sighed softly. "Hopefully I've guessed wrongly. Lingxi, if it weren't for your sudden breakthrough yesterday afternoon, I'm afraid both of us might not even know where we would be now." Yu Rulan let out a long sigh. Ji Lingxi was confused as well as she said, "You're not the only one, even I find it strange. I've just broken through to the 7th peak not too long ago, and now I'm suddenly breaking through to the 8th peak. Other than being a little excited at first, the rest of it was all guesswork and a little scared. What's there to be afraid of? Breaking through is always a good thing, especially for us right now." Yu Rulan smiled and said, You've gained the most from this trip. Before we came out, your cultivation base was only at the 4th peak, but it hasn't even been a year and you've already broken through to the 8th peak. Breaking through 4 levels in a year, and you didn't even rely on rare treasures of heaven and earth or spiritual pills. This is the first time I've heard of such progress. Jilingxi was full of doubts as well. She mumbled, I don't know what happened earlier. I only saw that you were about to be captured and I didn't know where the strength came from, but I charged over without a care. Only then did I realize that I've broken through. I didn't even feel the breakthrough then. Until now, I still feel like I'm dreaming. I can't believe that I've really reached the 8th peak. Sister Yu, do you think there's any hindrance with my current cultivation base? Will I fall back to the 7th peak after a few days? Yu Rulan only hummed in response and did not answer. While it was strange, both girls were not experts in this field. Despite their family background, they had never heard of such a thing. He really couldn't tell what the pros and cons were. He could only hide this doubt in his heart and ask when he met someone who understood. Just as Yu Rulan had said, Jilingxi's sudden breakthrough to the 8th peak was a good thing for the current situation. However, if the martial experts such as Ling Xiaozue and Dugucho were to find out about this improvement, their eyes would pop out of their sockets. After a short rest, everyone's mental strength had recovered somewhat. Jilingxi washed her face with the mountain stream water and took a deep breath. Sister Lan, let's go. Yu Rulan smiled faintly, a hint of sadness on her face as she said, I'm afraid we can't leave anymore. Her eyes looked at the sky through the dense treetops. Jilingxi followed Yu Rulan's gaze and looked up. In the sky, a giant crimson bird was circling back and forth, letting out a shrill cry. He actually caught up again? Jilingxi gritted her teeth in hatred. Those pursuers were really like ghosts that refused to leave. Yu Rulan looked worried. If she had guessed correctly, this short rest was probably a gap that the other party had purposely left for them. Lingxi, Yu Rulan said urgently in a low voice, remember what Sister Yu said? If we're separated, don't look for me. Don't go home and don't go to my house. Yu Rulan said resolutely, go straight to Tiantang City and look for Yun Yang. In the future, don't do anything else, don't care about him. Jilingxi kept quiet for a bit, a cold, murderous intent gleaming in her eyes as she said, Sister Lan, so you've guessed it too. Yu Rulan sighed deeply. Yes. Something must have happened to our family, or perhaps someone from our family wants to deal with us. We've been away all these years, ignoring our family's orders. I'm afraid we've incurred the family's displeasure. I'm afraid they won't let us go this time. Yu Rulan said, my heart is dead now, but you're different. Jilingxi gritted her teeth and said, Sister Lan, I have an idea. What idea? Yu Rulan asked. Split up. Jilingxi said, but it's not the separation you're thinking of. We'll go our separate ways from the guards. Both of us will go together, hiding our tracks and escaping quietly. Yu Rulan shuddered. We'll still be too big of a target if we go together. We'll live together and die together. Jilingxi gritted her teeth and quickly gathered the guards to make some simple arrangements. Then she took out her and Yu Rulan's sachets and cut it open, allowing the guards to carry the spices with them. Everyone take care. If we don't go with you, perhaps your chances of escaping will be higher. If you run into danger, there's no need to fight with your lives on the line. The priority is to stay alive. Let's split up and meet up in Tiantang City. Jilingxi ordered, go. Jilingxi's decisiveness in this critical moment stunned Yu Rulan. Before she could react, she was pulled into the bushes by Jilingxi. Along the way, the grass, roots, and leaves were plucked by Jilingxi and rolled into a ball in her hand. She then rubbed it fiercely. Then she smeared the juices on both their bodies and faces. These juices are enough to get rid of the smell on us. Then we'll go back. It's a surprise. Jilingxi gritted her teeth. No matter what, we can't let them succeed. The crimson bird that had appeared out of nowhere was still circling in the sky, making all sorts of postures to give directions. However, its postures were no longer as orderly as before, they were rather messy. To be more precise, it was giving directions everywhere. The targets on the ground were completely scattered. It was obvious that the beast was dumbfounded. The people who were rushing over were all dumbfounded when they saw the bird's postures in the sky. What was going on? There should only be one direction of escape. Even if they split into two groups, there should only be two directions. However, according to the Crimson Bird signal, there seemed to be 7 or 8 directions. Could it be that their people were everywhere? How many of them were left now? However, there were also people who were familiar with the Crimson Bird's habits. They reacted after a moment of confusion. They should have split up and run in different directions. Wouldn't that be what the crimson bird indicated? Send the signal immediately. Narrow the encirclement and surround them. Don't let anyone go. The enemy's hundreds of people immediately rushed into the mountain and launched the most rigorous search. One of the young men in white looked grim. If they were completely scattered like this, the spies he had planted would be completely useless. Ji Lingxi pulled Yu Rulan along as they walked back as carefully as they could. The direction they had intended to head in was already a mess now. Noises could be heard from time to time. Each time there was a commotion, it meant that one of the 18 people on their side had been discovered, captured, or killed. Both the girls' expressions were grim. It was heavy. Occasionally, they would glance at each other and see the seriousness and doubt in each other's eyes. What they could be sure of now was that something had gone wrong with their families, but what exactly had gone wrong? They were still baffled. On the same night, when Han Wufei left the residence of Crown Prince, he seemed rather preoccupied. The tower's higher-ups had been coming one after another during this period of time. The situation made Han Wufei feel that something big was about to happen. What could it be? Why would so many higher-ups of the tower gather in Yutang's capital? It was inexplicable. Other than the Four Seasons Tower's matters, there was also the matter of the residence of Crown Prince that he was responsible for. The Crown Prince had used a very far-fetched reason to forcefully take it away from him and hand it over to someone else. Although Han Wufei was still the Crown Prince's advisor in name, he was actually idle and had become an advisor in name only. Sitting in his own house with nothing to do, Han Wufei could not help feeling like he might as well go home. His wife and children were all in his secluded villa. It had been a long time since he had seen them. Should he make use of this time to go back? Han Wufei asked the kitchen to prepare a few dishes and drank by himself. He did not know why, but his desire to go home was growing stronger. After a few glasses of wine, the feeling was like a wildfire that could not be controlled. I'll bid farewell to His Highness tomorrow morning and go back for a short stay. The capital's situation is strange anyway, it's good for me to leave temporarily, Han Wufei decided inwardly. Just as he was making up his mind, a sudden gust of wind blew and a loud explosion came from the door. That was because the entire door had been smashed into smithereens in all directions. A few guards of the residence were the first to bear the brunt of the impact, their faces bloody and mangled from the flying splinters. The unforeseen event this time came abruptly and without the slightest sign. A black silhouette charged in from the door like a phantom, carrying a boundless murderous aura. All the lanterns along the way were extinguished, bringing endless darkness to the residence of Han. The uninjured guards of the residence of Han went forward together, intending to stop the intruder, but the intruder charged at them like a whirlwind, like a dragon that was overturning the seas and rivers. As the cold gleam flashed, blood spurted into the air. Han Wufei, who was in the room, could hear the sound of the incoming weapon slicing through the air. He knew that the newcomer was not friendly, so he dashed out of the room with a whoosh. Unexpectedly, the masked man in black dashed to him like a hot knife through butter, accompanied by a rain of blood. The masked man's palm was like a knife as he slammed it down. There was not the slightest bit of sloppiness. Behind him were the residents of Han's guards who had been flung out in all directions, but they had yet to land on the ground. Everything happened abruptly and it was also extremely fast. The palm fell with the force of a collapsing mountain. Chapter 239. Everything happened abruptly and it was also extremely fast. Han Wufei watched as the killing blow approached, but he remained calm in the face of danger. His left hand parried swiftly while his right hand pulled out the sword. Just as he was about to counterattack, he felt a tremendous force surging towards him from where his left palm was parrying. His entire body stepped back involuntarily, feeling as if a mountain was pressing down on his chest, suffocating him for a moment. He took 7 steps back, only to realize that the sword in his hand had not even been thrust forward. An 8th peak expert? Shocked, Han Wufei hollered, "Who are you?" As the saying went, a small clue would reveal the general trend. An expert would know the presence or absence of a hand. It had only been one move, but Han Wufei had already determined that the other party was an 8th peak cultivator who was stronger than him. In spite of this, Han Wufei was still composed. As he retreated, his left hand shook and a fire arrow shot into the sky, exploding hundreds of feet in the air. He had sent out a distress signal at once. As long as he could buy himself some time, he would be able to get help. When the black silhouette saw Han Wufei, a strange glint flashed across his eyes, but his attacks became even more ferocious, completely disregarding his own safety. His first move was successful, but he did not slow down at all. As if he had turned into a whirlwind, he pounced on Han Wufei again with renewed vigor. Palm after palm, each strike was like a giant axe splitting a mountain. He did not speak a word throughout the entire process, only focusing on his attacks. Han Wufei only managed to take 2 more blows before he was completely at a disadvantage. Thoughts flashed through his mind as he hollered, "Who are you? Who are you? You should at least tell me your name if you're here." The black-clothed man still didn't say a word. He made a circle with his right hand, and there was actually a flash of lightning. Then he smashed his fist down again. Han Wufei dodged swiftly, but the cold gleam in the other party's hand caught him off guard. Han Wufei could no longer avoid the attack. With a cry, a long wound appeared on his abdomen. Blood splattered and the wound was so deep that bone could be seen. A cold gleam flew out. It was the sword in Han Wufei's hand that had been sent flying by the other party. Han Wufei was a resilient man. He did not panic even in the face of danger, retreating continuously and dodging swiftly. Even when he was calm, it was clear that he no longer had the will to continue fighting. His fighting spirit and confidence had been completely obliterated by the other party's tyrannical attack. However, the black shadow chased after him like a shadow and continued to punch and kick him. The cold light was like a sword that appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Swoosh, 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 it was like lightning flashing in the night sky, adding more wounds to Han Wufei's body. Blood dripped from Han Wufei's body. Although he tried his best to dodge, the wounds on his body had greatly depleted his stamina. With another loud cry, Han Wufei, who was forced into a corner, had nowhere to run. He chose to meet the man in black's palm with all his might. Han Wufei sucked in a deep breath and retracted his palms with all his might. A suction force suddenly appeared. In spite of it, Han Wufei was ruthless enough. Not only did he fight the stronger one with a weaker cultivation base and was injured, but he had also absorbed all of the force from both of them. He then forcefully converted the 2 forces into a retreating force. However, his meridians and internal organs were all heavily injured at this moment. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, his body flew up into the sky unsteadily. Han Wufei had calculated everything and paid the price of severe internal injuries to find this chance to escape by injuring himself first. How could he miss it? He stomped hard on a big tree and was about to shoot out like a bolt of lightning. As long as he could fly out, he would be out of danger. At the very least, he would have a chance to catch his breath. The person below him would have to disperse the residual force from the clash of forces as well, so he would not be able to catch up in time. However, just as he leaped into the air, a white silhouette flashed and appeared in front of Han Wufei's flying form. Han Wufei shrieked, terrified beyond measure. A gaping maw appeared before him. Han Wufei's body flew out, sending his head right into the gaping maw. The white shadow that appeared was a gigantic leopard. It was snow white all over, appearing like a phantom. The leopard's mouth opened abruptly and let out a howl. Han Wufei screamed in despair. His vision darkened as his head was already in the strange leopard's mouth. Then he felt like he was floating and knew nothing else. The Eclipse Panther's howl had bitten Han Wufei's head off. The headless corpse was still in the air, flying forward in accordance to Han Wufei's last will. At this moment, the situation was extremely strange and terrifying. After a long while, Han Wufei's corpse had stopped moving, but no one knew where it had landed. Screams that sounded like they had been scared out of their wits could be heard from afar, signifying the incident. The Eclipse Panther swayed its tail and landed on a tree. It opened its mouth and Han Wufei's head rolled off. The Eclipse Panther's gigantic body vanished in a flash. All that was left on the spot was gone. A palm-sized kitten appeared on the tree. It stretched out its paws and tried to slide down the tree. Its posture was extremely adorable, making people want to love it endlessly. As for the masked man in black, he had not lifted his head since Han Wufei had dashed out. He did not care about Han Wufei at all, rushing straight into Han Wufei's room and starting to rummage through the room. It was obvious that he was certain that Han Wufei was dead and there was no need for him to observe any further. Now, his main objective was to plunder his belongings. With a slam of his palm, the masked man entered in a flash. A moment later, the man in black dragged a huge bundle out like a bolt of lightning. 2 loud bangs lingered in the air as the masked man killed the remaining Han family guards. Only then did he leave with the huge bundle, disappearing into the night. He came and went like a flash of lightning. It was only after he left that the fire in the residence of Han began to burn. Thick smoke billowed and the fire burned fiercely. After a while, 2 black figures rushed over at an extremely fast speed from afar. Is it Han Wufei's signal? This bastard. How dare he send out this tower summon signal in such an important place in Tiantang City? Is he looking for death? Let's go over and take a look first. Han Wufei is alert. Maybe he's really in mortal danger. Let's go. Oh no, there's a fire over there. It's coming from the residence of Han. Han Wufei is really in danger. I'm afraid it's too late. There's no sound of weapons clashing or fists clashing. There's a commotion over there. It's a headless corpse. Why does it look so familiar? Let's go over and take a closer look. Maybe there are other clues. When they took a closer look at the headless corpse on the ground, both of them were speechless. The clothes worn by the headless corpse were undoubtedly Han Wufei's clothes, but what about the wounds all over the body? The wounds on the body were obviously sword wounds, but what about the wound on the neck and head? It was definitely not cut by a sharp blade, but more like it was bitten off by a ferocious beast. This was strange. What kind of ferocious beast could do something like this in Tiantang City? No matter how weak Han Wufei was, he was still a 7th peak expert. What kind of mystical beast would it take to bite his head off? How could the corpse be tossed so far away? It was quite a distance away from the residence of Han. After a fruitless search, both of them came to Han Wufei's house and were surprised to find Han Wufei's head lying on the ground. It was fortunate that it had not been engulfed by the flames, lying face up on the ground. It was bitten off. One of them frowned. This is too strange. It looks like the house has been robbed. All the guards are dead. This is the prelude to the annihilation of the entire clan. There's no trace left at all. How are we going to track the murderer? Look over there, there should be a secret chamber in Han Wufei's house. It's over there, it's already broken. How could anything be left behind? Search it. Let's go back there quickly, it's more urgent there. Of course. Be careful, the murderer is still nearby. Both of them looked at the chaotic scene in shock and suspicion. They searched carefully, not letting go of any abnormalities on the ground. Each of them was on high alert. Immediately, an intimidating aura exuded faintly. It was then that, meow? A weak, trembling meow of a cat could be heard. Both of them turned around instinctively to look at the source of the sound. There was a little kitten curled up on the tree, trembling in fear. Its tiny paws reached down tentatively, but it seemed like it dared not come down because the tree was too tall. It was truly adorable. Could this cat be from Han Wufei's house? One of them asked suspiciously. The other person waved his hand, and a gust of strong wind whooshed out. The kitten on the tree seemed to be startled by the sudden turn of events. It screamed and jumped down without a care in the world. Both of them dodged instinctively. The little white cat landed between them seemingly unintentionally. It lifted its head and looked at the two of them, its eyes filled with innocence and innocence. This cat is quite cute. Too bad it's a normal house cat, only a plaything and useless, one of them said, waving his hand to chase the cat away. His hands were exceptionally gentle, obviously charmed by the cat's cuteness. The kitten, on the other hand, seemed to be extremely frightened. In an instant, all the white fur on its body stood up. It suddenly let out a loud meow and raised its two little claws with a swoosh, scratching both of their legs. F***CK. Damn it. Both of them were shocked. The sudden claw tore their robes apart, even the flesh underneath was scratched open with a few bloody gashes. They were flustered and exasperated, the tiniest bit of compassion thrown out the window. They wanted nothing more than to capture the kitten and make it into a bowl of cute tiger soup. Unexpectedly, the kitten let out a low meow and had already burrowed into the shadows like lightning, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. This speed was unimaginably fast and unimaginable. The wounds on their legs were bleeding profusely. How could a mere kitten cause such damage? Chapter 240. How could the two of them have imagined that a kitten that had not been weaned on its mother's milk could be so lethal? Caught off guard, they were caught off guard and fell into the trap. However, when they wanted to catch the kitten and beat it to death to vent their anger, they found that it was nowhere to be found. After cursing and swearing, they were no longer conflicted. After all, they were from the Four Seasons Tower. None of them were ordinary people. Han Wufei's accidental death was a fact, but the things he had left behind might leave some clues. Thinking of this, both of them tensed up, activating their mystical chi cultivation base and diving into the sea of fire. It was a pity that they cursed again after searching the place with great effort. Who was the one who did this? Why was it like a locust swarm had swept through the place? All the valuables had been swept clean, leaving nothing behind. It was even more thorough than a bandit's robbery. Even the other secret chamber within the secret chamber was empty. We have to go back and report this to the Lord quickly. Some news must have been leaked. One of them spoke hastily with a grim expression. That's right. Shen Yushi had just met with an accident a few days ago. That place is the most suspicious. The entire Hall of Nine Moons had just finished assembling. Just as they were about to be handed over to him, something happened at this juncture. Han Wufei has been inexplicably implicated as well. If the culprit is the same person, not only is he resourceful, he might even be targeting the Four Seasons Tower. You're right, go back quickly. Both of them disappeared with a swoosh. On the other side, the assassination of Yang Buotao was not as easy as targeting Han Wufei. Yang Buotao was Yutong's military general. Purely in terms of status, he was only below Tai Zheng. He was one of the top 10 heavyweights in Yutong's military and was the marshal of the northern troop. Once this person was touched, there would be a great deal of repercussions. In other words, Yang Buotao was not on the same level as Shen Yushi, Han Wufei, and the others. Yun Yang and Fang Mafei sneaked into the residence of Yang. According to the plan, Yun Yang disappeared into the dark in a flash while Fang Mafei, who was dressed in black and masked, strode forward without saying a word. Ignoring any questions, he lifted his leg and kicked the door of the general's residence over. With a loud bang, the entire door flew into the sky. Then Fang Mafei charged in with a long howl. Fang Mafei's current cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of the 8th peak. His ability was comparable to Mi Kongquan in his most powerful state, perhaps even superior. Now that he was unleashing his full power, the lethality was not to be underestimated. He killed his way in like a hot knife through butter, and all who obstructed him were swept away. Under normal circumstances, one's cultivation base of the 8th peak could be considered as a top-notch expert. With such skills, it was more than enough to snipe Tai Zheng, who was not within the range of the military formation. Therefore, Fang Mafei's one-sided massacre was not surprising at all, it was within reason. It was a pity that his aggressive advance did not last long. He had only taken a few steps into the second courtyard when he was met with an unusually strong obstruction. In the darkness, a few black shadows that had been hiding somewhere suddenly flew out like giant birds, pouncing at Fang Mafei from 7 to 8 directions at the same time. At the same time, a sharp whistle rang out. All the ordinary soldiers and generals in the general's residence disappeared, replaced by teams of elite troops clad in steel armor that emerged from the darkness. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. These people all climbed up the 4 high walls, and even the trees and roofs were densely packed. Cracking sounds could be heard as hundreds of steel bows were drawn to the fullest at the same time. Steel arrows were nocked, gleaming with a cold gleam. His momentum was unstoppable and terrifying to the extreme. Not only was Fang Mafei, who had been attacking aggressively, suppressed, he was also locked on by countless arrows. He was like a beast that had fallen into a death trap, turning from a predator to a prey. As the tables turned, the main room's door opened abruptly. Inside, a dozen men in green walked out with their arms behind their backs, their eyes glinting coldly as they focused on Fang Mafei's battle. Following them were 2 old men, one on the left and one on the right. They walked out slowly, calm and composed. The last one to appear was Yang Buotao, who stood in the middle. He was dressed casually, his physique tall and muscular, his face square, his eyes watching the scene like a hawk. "They've come," Yang Buotao ordered, "light the fire." Following a loud boom, thousands of torches were suddenly lit up in the second courtyard of the general's mansion. The entire place was illuminated as if it was daytime, and even the slightest detail could be seen. From the moment the door was breached, Fang Mafei had only charged into the space of less than 1,000 feet. He had just entered the second courtyard when he was stopped. The weakest of the experts fighting with him now was at least of the 7th peak level. This was a ridiculous and extravagant lineup. Forget Tai Zheng's guards, even the 8 top-notch guards of Han Sanhe the other day were no better than this, perhaps even slightly weaker. How could Yang Buotao have such a strong lineup of guards? Fang Mafei dashed left and right, attacking ferociously, but he could not even break through the encirclement, what more to kill Yang Buotao. Even when he was in danger, Fang Mafei did not show the slightest hint of fear. He let out a thunderous roar, the sword in his hand swinging and closing, glinting coldly as he attacked with all his might. Swoosh! An arrow suddenly shot out from the roof, like a comet chasing after the moon, arriving in a flash. Be it the timing, direction, or angle of this arrow, every point was just right. The enemies on all sides had shifted and revealed Fang Mafei's silhouette. Moreover, the instant he stepped forward, it was as if a white steed had flashed across a crevice. Clang! Fang Mafei deflected the incoming arrow with a swing of his sword, the sword in his hand actually trembling as he felt a strong vibration in his wrist. He could not help blurting out, "Deicide Bow?" Not only was the arrow's landing spot perfect, the angle and timing were superb, its lethality was equally shocking. It was an arrow from the deicide bow. Someone among the attackers snickered coldly. Not bad, you're quite knowledgeable. It's the deicide bow. Deicide bow. The mystical steel arrow. It was rumored that the deicide bow was forged from the horn of a 6th-level mystical beast, the armored rhinoceros, and the bowstring was made from the beast's tendon. As for the mystical steel arrow, although the shaft was only forged from fine steel, the arrowhead was forged from the actual mystical steel. An ordinary shot that could shoot an arrow from 100 feet away was a joke to the archer who wielded the deicide bow. It was worthless. An ordinary bow and arrow could only be considered a super strong bow if it had the strength of 8 stones and above. It could be said that it was invincible on the battlefield. However, the deicide bow required at least a strength of 30 stones and above to fully draw the bow. With such strength, even a cultivator who had reached the 3rd or 4th level of mystical chi would find it difficult to draw the bow perfectly. Not to mention the need to aim for a long period of time, maintain the stability of the bow, and fire continuously. It was even more difficult. However, once the archer of the deicide bow was successful, an arrow released would have the power to split rocks. If 10,000 arrows were to be released at once, even a grandmaster perfected expert would die under the arrows. If that was not the case, how would it be known as the deicide bow? The original intention of the deicide bow's creator was that even if the gods descended from heaven, they would be slain by such a bow and arrow. However, the materials for the deicide bow were extremely rare. An armored rhinoceros only had 2 horns, and 1 horn was just enough to make a deicide bow. Even if there was an extra horn, it would be difficult to make use of it, not to mention the restriction of the bowstring made from mystical beast tendons. Hence, this bow had always been used as a secret weapon in the military formation. It would only be used when they encountered a strong opponent, such as an invincible general like Shangguan Wudi. No one would have guessed that General Yang Buotao's house actually had more than 400 of them. Moreover, there were more than 400 archers who could control the deicide bow freely. Anyone who could use the deicide bow, at least to an archer, was definitely an expert among experts. The hearts of these archers had to be as calm as ice and snow. These people had always been the killing gods of the battle formation. They could move freely and decide when to release the arrow. Each of them had a unique mind and were unpredictable. However, once they released the arrow, an enemy general would definitely fall. After all, the mystical steel arrow that went with the deicide bow was also a rare and precious item. Any mistake would be a great waste. Fang Mafei's expression was indifferent, but he was actually groaning in his heart. To Fang Mafei, he had thought that he could go on a killing spree with his cultivation-based breakthrough and show off his prowess. In the end, he had fallen into an unprecedented trap the moment he came out. The situation was actually unprecedentedly dangerous. Putting aside the fact that the enemies that surrounded him from all directions had already trapped him and the chances of him breaking out were minuscule, those at the door who had yet to make a move must be even more terrifying. These people were enough to kill him over and over again. That was not all. There were still 400 to 500 deicide bows aimed at him. They're thinking too highly of me. They're practically treating me like Ling Xiaozue. Fang Mafei's emphasis on the deicide bow was higher than that of the people who were attacking him. As an assassin, he knew all too well the terrifying power of the deicide bow. If he were to be shot, he would be severely injured even if he did not die. His ability would be diminished. To him now, the deicide bow was like a demonic hand that could take his life at any time. It was difficult to avoid, helpless. Swoosh. It was another arrow. As Fang Mafei dodged it with all his might, he revealed a slight opening and was struck on his back. If it were not for his killer instinct that allowed him to deflect the force the moment he was struck, he would have been severely injured. Even so, he almost cried out in pain. The mystical steel arrow that had been evaded plunged into the ground with a swoosh. It went straight into the ground. Not even the tip of the arrowhead could be seen. It was completely embedded in the ground. Chapter 241. The moment Fang Mafei thought of this, he calmed himself down and his fighting spirit increased. Now that the situation was clear and there was a huge disparity between the strong and the weak, he believed that his young master would be able to make the right choice. As long as his young master did not force himself to attack, he would not be exposed. Even if he were to die here, it would be worth it. Of course, if he could drag a few of them down with him at the last moment, it would be even more profitable. Fang Mafei's long sword trembled and he suddenly let out a long howl. His voice was unprecedentedly fierce, piercing through the clouds and splitting the sky. The sword light that erupted was endless, rolling like a dragon as it dashed left and right. It was extremely valiant and imposing, forcing the 8 experts who were surrounding him into a disadvantageous position. He's fighting with all his might. Unfortunately, he's just trying to show off his bravery. He can only gain the upper hand for a moment before he falls back into a hopeless situation and dies in an instant. One of the people watching from afar smiled faintly. Before he finished speaking, someone beside him chuckled. It's such a big fight, it'd be a pity if he dies in a siege. Let me accompany him and have some fun. As soon as he finished speaking, he moved 80 feet away and was already above the battlefield. With a shout, a long saber appeared out of thin air. He swung the saber in a circle and wielded it like a hammer, smashing it down with the force of a mountain. Fang Mafei did not dare to be careless and defended with all his might. It was a pity that he had pushed his cultivation base to the limit and gained a temporary advantage. In reality, it was like drinking poison to quench his thirst and did not benefit the battle at all. Instead, he had expended a great deal of his vitality. Although he was not completely exhausted, he had lost much of his edge. The saber user who joined in later not only had a higher cultivation base than Fang Mafei, he aimed at the moment when Fang Mafei had used up all his strength and had yet to recover. He was bullying the weak, so how could Fang Mafei defend himself? With a loud crack, the sword in Fang Mafei's hand broke into 2. He spat out a mouthful of blood as he staggered backward unsteadily. Amidst this, a saber landed on his shoulder and a palm landed on his back. If Fang Mafei had not held on with all his might, he would have fallen to the ground. Fang Mafei's mind was still calm, but he felt his internal organs burning and his skills dissipating. There was only one thought in his mind: young master, please don't appear. Please don't appear. Hurry up and leave. However, just as Fang Mafei had lost all hope and was no longer able to defend himself, a sudden gust of wind blew in the sky above the Yang residence without warning. In an instant, sand and pebbles were sent flying. Even the archers on the tree fell with a thud. In the blink of an eye, the hurricane that had swept through the entire area turned into a tornado, rushing towards Yang Buotao like a raging dragon. Someone in the crowd could not help but exclaim, "It's supreme wind?" Yang Buotao and the people around him glared at the person who had spoken, wishing they could cut him into pieces. A gale swept across the ground. The 2 old men beside Yang Buotao had gloomy expressions on their faces. The corners of their mouths revealed a hint of undisguised mockery. They took a step forward at the same time, and like 2 majestic mountains they blocked the hurricane head-on. With a loud bang, the incoming wind was like a mountain crashing into it. Completely without any effect, it changed direction and soared into the sky. The cultivation base of the 2 old men was obviously much stronger than the rest of the people present. Moreover, the 2 of them had joined forces to attack. Even though the hurricane was unstoppable, it could not break through the strong defensive line formed by the 2 men. Although the wind had changed direction, it did not seem to stop. Instead, it swept up more grass, trees, sand, and pebbles, covering the sun and sky in an instant. One could not even see one's fingers if one stretched out one's hand. Then a ray of fire appeared, burning fiercely in the middle of the battle. Yang Buotao's subordinates were indeed elites. There was no hesitation in the face of such a drastic change. With a loud bang, a large pit was smashed into the ground. Everyone had acted in unison to extinguish the abrupt fire. The hurricane rose up like a raging dragon. One could vaguely see a human figure in the middle of the hurricane. A leisurely voice spoke, "Yang Buotao, as an important general of the empire, you do not wish to serve the country but collude with the enemy to frame my 9 Supremes brothers. Your crime is unpardonable. Today I will only mete out a light punishment. If you dare to commit the offense again, you will be beheaded without mercy." The voice rose slowly, coming from afar. Everyone present could hear it clearly. The sound of the wind finally subsided. There was a large pit in the residence of Yang's field. The masked man in black who was severely injured just now was nowhere to be seen. The 2 elders beside Yang Buotao had disappeared without a trace as well. They had given chase, but it was unknown if they could still catch up to them. Yang Buotao's expression was solemn, his eyes filled with rage. At this moment, a portion of the archers on the surrounding walls were stunned. Bewildered gazes looked from all directions, focusing on Yang Buotao. Was the person who had spoken just now the long-awaited Lord Supreme Wind? Was what he had said just now true? Was it really Yang Buotao who had gone mad and colluded with the enemy to murder the 9 Supremes Lords? There was no factual basis for this matter, nor was there any witness or evidence. There was no room for it to be believed. However, it was Supreme Flame and Supreme Wind who had appeared just now. There was no falsehood in this. They were all people who had been through the battlefield and had the experience of fighting alongside the 9 Supreme Lords many times. There was no mistaking this familiar feeling. If these words had come from the mouths of these 2 lords, was there a need for proof? There was no need. The Empire of Yutong's military would never doubt the words of the 9 Supreme Lords, no matter what the content was. There was no room for doubt. Clang. An archer who had been standing on the wall retracted his deicide bow and hopped down from the ground. He took a few large strides and came before Yang Buotao, asking loudly, "Marshal Yang, may I ask if what Lord Supreme Wind said just now is true?" As the words left his mouth, the gazes of countless archers shot over like sharp arrows from all directions. Other than the 100 archers from Yang Buotao's troop, the rest of the archers were all staring at Yang Buotao with burning gazes. Even the archers from Yang Buotao's troop had lowered their heads and perked up their ears, waiting for Yang Buotao's reply. Yang Buotao's expression darkened as he hollered, "It was just the ramblings of the assassin who attacked just now, trying to mislead us. Why did all of you join in the commotion? Didn't you all see the assassin trying to kill me just now? Military orders must be obeyed. Do all of you want to give it a try?" The military's actions were based on absolute obedience to the superior's orders. Any action that questioned the superior's orders was a crime deserving of death. Under normal circumstances, when Yang Buotao had spoken, everyone dared not say anything, even if they still had doubts in their hearts. Unexpectedly, the archer who had stood up to ask the question said loudly, "This lowly official's confusion doesn't lie with me but with the 9 Supreme Lords. I hope that Marshal Yang can clear up our doubts. If there's anything that violates the military law, this lowly official will shoulder it all and apologize with my death later." But it was the 2 masters of wind and fire who showed up just now, and they were good at the fire and wind supernatural powers. Since the 2 masters appeared here and even pointed at the marshal, there must be a reason. This is related to Yutong's national affairs. This lowly official's life is not worth mentioning, but this matter must be clarified. Everyone knows that the marshal is the empire's pillar, the protector of the border. Why would the 9 Supreme Lords come looking for trouble with the marshal in such a blatant manner, and even say that Sir is suspected of harming the 9 Supreme Lords? The archer said boldly, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Before his words echoed in the air, the 300 archers behind him spoke in unison, "Marshal, please clear up our doubts." Yang Buotao's expression was as dark as ink as he said in a low voice, "There's an assassin trying to kill me in broad daylight. You all..." Before he finished, a man in green beside him said, "Marshal Yang, there are only 2 assassins here today. One is the assassin who attacked us earlier. His moves are brutal and brutal. The other person's cultivation method is strange, but his strength is not high. The move of throwing the fireball is probably from the Thunderbolt Hall. However, the other person's method of turning mystical chi into gang and moving like the wind is even more strange and inexplicable. We can't underestimate him." Nominally, this was an analysis of the assassin's background, but it was actually a roundabout way to provide a reason for Yang Buotao to deal with the doubts. Yang Buotao understood. He frowned and said, "2 people? Not 3 people?" The man came out in a flash and picked up something from the pit. He said, "Marshal Yang, please look at this kerosene that hasn't burned out yet. This kerosene is bright and faintly glows with a green luster. It's clearly the unique kerosene of the Thunderbolt Hall's clear sky thunder fire. However, I don't know when Marshal offended the Thunderbolt Hall and caused this assassination." Yang Buotao frowned and sighed deeply. He said, "About a year ago the young master of the Thunderbolt Hall entered my service. His original intention was to use his military merits for promotion, but I beheaded him for violating military law. So, although I have a clear conscience in handling this matter, the military law is still too strict. However, it was a war at that time and I really couldn't show mercy outside the law." "I see. In a war, military law comes first. Lawbreakers must be punished and law enforcement must be strict. This is how it should be." The man in green said, "However, the power of the Thunderbolt Hall is too great. Marshal, you should be careful from now on and not be taken advantage of." Yang Buotao shook his head and sighed. "How can the military law be lenient? Even if I had to do it all over again, I would still enforce the law strictly. There's no room for discussion. So what if the Thunderbolt Hall comes looking for trouble with me?" Yang Buotao said righteously, "I'm just worried that the enemy is full of tricks and that our brothers will think too much." Another person hollered with a dark expression, "Did everyone hear that? Don't just listen to rumors in the future. If you believe a few words spoken by an assassin, Won't any random person be able to shake the military's morale with just a few words? What a scandal. The archers looked at each other, doubt still lingering in their eyes. Finally, they lowered their heads and said, "We were too agitated just now and have misunderstood Marshal. Please punish us, Marshal." The archers lowered their heads and looked at each other, noticing the glint of doubt in each other's eyes. They had seen it with their own eyes and heard it with their own ears. How could it be erased with just a few words? Yun Yang's short sentence had planted a seed in the hearts of the northern troop soldiers. Was it true or not? Chapter 242. Yang Buotao sighed and said, "All of you are hot-blooded. What crime have you committed? It's not just you. I've been hoping for the arrival of both Lord Supreme Wind and Flame just now. Even if both of them misunderstood me for some reason or even killed me, as long as both of them are still here, it's the Empire of Yutong's greatest blessing." The group sighed together. The incident in the residence of Yang had finally come to an end. The tornado that Yun Yang had turned into swept Fang Mafei along and disappeared instantly, the two silhouettes chasing after the tornado relentlessly. Yun Yang saw that the other party's abilities were profound and that he could not shake them off with just his wind manifestation. Without hesitation he waved his hand. The two men felt a ball of fire coming towards them and hurriedly countered it with their palms. With their cultivation base, a wave of their hands was enough to extinguish the oncoming fire. However, both of them felt that something was amiss at the same time. The two balls of fire were too weak, dispersing upon contact. There was no room for resistance at all. Just as the two men were in doubt, they saw another ball of fire that was even more intense and wider than before. It burned fiercely and engulfed both of them in an instant. Both of them were shocked. Seeing the intensity of the fire, they dared not be careless. They first circulated their profound cultivation base to protect themselves and then worked together to sweep away the blazing fire. However, the intensity of the fire this time was still beyond their expectations. The range of the fire was vast, but it could not withstand a single blow. It was just that the range of the fire this time was too wide. When the two men rushed out of the fire, they realized that the tornado had already disappeared. Both of them were veterans in battle. They knew what was going on from the slightest clue and stopped immediately, activating their deific consciousness to search. Supreme Wind seemed to have left with his men, but both of them had only been distracted by the fire for a moment. Supreme Wind and the injured assassin would not have gone far. They must still be hiding nearby. As long as they searched carefully, they would definitely be caught. How could Yun Yang not know that the two pursuers were not easy to deal with? The trick just now could only distract the enemy for a moment, but what he wanted was a moment of buffer. He brought Fang Mafei into an abandoned house and simply bandaged his wounds before saying, "Stay here and don't move. Leave immediately when I lure them away. This is no problem for you, no need to say anything more." To an assassin, the ultimate assassination technique was secondary. Concealing one's tracks was the most powerful trump card. If Fang Mafei did not even have the means to conceal his tracks in the face of danger and not be discovered by his pursuers, then he was courting death and had nothing to do with anyone else. Before Fang Mafei could speak, Yun Yang had already turned into a gust of wind and disappeared into the horizon with a swoosh, trailing a black silhouette behind him. How could the pursuers let go of the man who was being carried away by the tornado? With a loud cry, they gave chase like a flash of lightning. To the both of them, it was not that they had not thought of the possibility that the person who had cast the wind manifestation skill had not escaped together with the injured. However, Fang Mafei was not even a threat to them. He was only an 8th peak cultivator, nothing to be afraid of. Instead, it was Supreme Wind who was in front of them that they had to eliminate. There was no time to lose. Seeing the shadow of death leaving swiftly, Fang Mafei was saddened. However, he did not slow down at all, moving swiftly and leaving his original spot. In the sky, a tornado swept forward like lightning, causing the clouds in the sky to scatter and scatter as it swept out of the city. By the time Yun Yang returned to the residence of Yun, it was already late in the night. He was exhausted, his legs felt like they were floating. He was utterly exhausted. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei had already returned home. Even Fang Mafei's injuries had been tended to. Shui Wuyin was deep in thought, facing a pile of items, occasionally scribbling and drawing with his brush. How was it? Yun Yang was truly exhausted. He sat down in front of Shui Wuyin the moment he returned home, but there was no sense of defeat in his expression. The attack this time was a complete success. Shui Wuyin looked satisfied, even elated, as he said, "Our current goal has basically been achieved." His words stunned Fang Mafei, who had been suppressing his injuries and refusing to go into closed-door recuperation right away, waiting for Yun Yang's return. Our two-pronged attack this time, Lao Mei had killed Han Wufei effortlessly and had indeed completed the mission. However, he himself had stepped right into the ambush and was almost beaten into a dead dog. If it weren't for Yun Yang's assistance, he would have become a dead dog. How could this coffin-faced man say that it was a complete success? Was this consolation or sarcasm? Could he be more straightforward? Yun Yang nodded. Not bad indeed. The target has been achieved. Fang Mafei could no longer hold it in and said, "Young master, we didn't kill Yang Buotao. It's this subordinate's cultivation base that's not up to par. I've let young master down." Yin Yang smiled. "Old Fang, you don't have to blame yourself. Our attack to kill Yang Buotao this time was only a pretense from the beginning to the end." A pretense? Fang Mafei was even more puzzled, not understanding what Yin Yang was referring to. Of course it's a pretense. "I've never thought that you could kill Yang Buotao alone." Yin Yang said, Yang Buotao's background as a member of the Four Seasons Tower aside, his status in Yutong is equally respected. He's one of the four marshals of Yutong's military and the entire northern troop respects him. For such a person, even if the evidence is conclusive, we can't assassinate him in secret like this. Speaking of which, Han Wufei was an unexpected gain today. Yun Yang smiled. Lao Mei's visit this time was more of a test. If there was an ambush there, Lao Mei would have returned at once and wouldn't have taken the risk. However, I didn't expect them to focus all their ambush on Yang Buotao's side and even put in deicide archers. They probably thought that Yang Buotao would be safe with Supreme Lord Springfrost's protection. Lao Mei said, "That's not bad." Han Wufei's side didn't have any decent guards at all. The entire killing process was so smooth that even I was puzzled. The moment I broke the door, I was prepared to run for my life. But when I felt it, there wasn't a single expert on the other side, only Han Wufei had some ability. When I had the upper hand, I was filled with disbelief and shock. Ah! Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei begrudgingly. This fellow's luck was really good. Could it be that luck was better when one's ability was weaker? There were 3 objectives today. First, to alert the enemy to get a glimpse of the other party's ability. Second, to reveal Supreme Wind's identity. Third, to send a signal to the Empire's higher-ups. Shui Wuyin said with satisfaction, "It looks like everything has been completed successfully and there's even an unexpected gain." Just like what Boss said, the additional deicide archers were an unnecessary addition. With the 500 archers by the side, the news of the 9 Supremes' reappearance can no longer be concealed. Next, Boss only needs to continue stirring up trouble. Yin Yang snorted. Stirring up trouble? What I want to do most now is to go on a killing spree like a whirlwind. As he spoke, Whitey 2 walked over gracefully with a meow, its tiny head rubbing against Yin Yang's calf. Whitey 2 did well in this battle. Lao Mei laughed and said, Han Wufei's head was bitten off by Whitey 2. Whitey 2 raised its head proudly and meowed. Yun Yang, who was carrying Whitey 2, felt a chill run down his spine. He tossed the creature to the ground and said with a frown, "Whitey 2, you actually ate a human head. That's disgusting." Whitey 2 meowed pitifully. Lao Mei said, "Whitey 2 didn't eat it, it threw it up again." However, 2 men went to Han Wufei's side and Whitey 2 laid in ambush. Each of them had a scratch mark on their calf. Yin Yang's eyes shone. "Whitey 2, if you see those 2 men again, can you recognize them?" Meow. Whitey 2 raised its head proudly and snorted. It looked proud and arrogant. "I can recognize them even if they turn into ashes." That's great, that's great." Yin Yang guffawed. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence was murdered. The Northern Marshal Yang Buotao was assassinated. The 2 assassinations that had taken place in a single night had broken the peace of Tiantang City. When they heard that the Northern Marshal had been assassinated, the assassin had turned into a tornado and a raging inferno. This incident had shaken the entire Yutong's higher authorities. Everyone thought of Supreme Wind and Flame at once. Especially when the assassin had left a message in the air. The message had been heard by everyone present. No matter how Yang Buotao explained to his troops, it could not hide the gossip. The news had spread throughout Yutong's capital city overnight. Yang Buotao, as an important general of the empire, did not think of serving the country but colluded with the enemy to frame my 9 Supremes' brothers. This is an unpardonable crime. The words were like thunder on a sunny day, shaking Yutong. Morning assembly. When His Majesty the Emperor arrived, his expression was extremely grim, not bothering to conceal it at all. The Nine Heavens dictum had informed Qiu Jianhan that the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence, Han Wufei, had been confirmed to be from the Four Seasons Tower and had been killed. This was supposed to be good news, but for His Majesty, there was suddenly an additional knot in his heart. The advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. The murder of Chu Tianlang earlier was related to the Crown Prince. This had already infuriated the emperor. Now there was Han Wufei, the main advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. How could this not make His Majesty even more worried? The anger in his heart immediately soared. Furthermore, there was He Hanqing. Even if he was an elder of 3 dynasties and the leader of Yutong's literary school, so what? After all, he was somehow related to the Four Seasons Tower in every aspect. Ling Xiaozui's angry rebuke was the biggest proof. The empire of Yutong was plagued with internal and external threats. The emperor felt like a mountain was pressing down on his heart. Chapter 243. If it were not for His Majesty's health that had been nurtured by Yun Yang during this period of time, he would have been fine. His anger alone would have suffocated him for a long time, but now that his body was getting better, as long as he did not engage in a life-and-death battle, he could usually expect to live to a ripe old age, much less be frustrated. After all, His Majesty's cultivation base was rather high as well. It had not even been half a day since His Majesty's mood had gotten better, but the possibility of Yang Buotao being a member of the Four Seasons Tower had come to light. This sudden realization made His Majesty feel like 100,000 horses were galloping in his heart. He was the pillar of the military, one of the 4 marshals. Is the Grand Commandant here yet? His Majesty sat on the throne with a grim expression. Qiu Jianhan coughed and said, "The Grand Commandant has been ill lately, but he'll be here today. It's just that the Grand Commandant's body is more sensitive to the cold during this season, so he might have to make some preparations before arriving." His Majesty nodded in understanding. "Please wait then." Has the Grand Tutor arrived? This humble official is here. Have the marshals arrived? Your Majesty, this humble general is here. His Majesty snorted but did not speak, closing his eyes to rest. Not long after, a rough voice rang out, "This old official is ashamed to be late." His Majesty had just opened his eyes, but he closed them again. It was the Grand Commandant who had left, but it was Lung Daoyin, that old fellow. This old fellow was not ill, but he had come so late. Did he think this was his dining hall? Lung Daoyin was met with Qiu Jianhan's questioning gaze. Lung Daoyin rolled his eyes and sighed, pursing his lips. The corners of Qiu Jianhan's lips twitched. Glancing at Yang Buotao discreetly, Lung Daoyin strode into the hall. Among the officials in the imperial court, Tai Zheng was the tallest. As he stood in the hall, he was 2 heads taller than the next taller person. He stood out like a crane amongst a flock of chickens, looking down on the crowd. No one else spoke, only Tai Zheng's eyes were glaring at Yang Buotao without blinking, as if he was going to swallow Yang Buotao alive. Yang Buotao felt goosebumps rising from his glare and finally said angrily, "What are you looking at?" Tai Zheng grew angrier as he hollered, "So what if I'm looking at you?" Yang Buotao was also furious. "Why don't you try looking again?" Tai Zheng lifted his neck and looked askance at Yang Buotao. "I dare you to say that again?" Yang Buotao only felt a belly full of anger. "Are you crazy?" Without further ado, Tai Zheng threw a punch at Yang Buotao's face and cursed, "F***CKU. Your father doesn't just want to look at you, I want to hit you and kill you. What can you do about it?" Yang Buotao's cultivation base was definitely not low, but no matter how hard he racked his brains, he would never have thought that Tai Zheng would actually dare to attack him in the Aurum throne room. He took the full brunt of the punch, seeing stars before his eyes. Enraged, he leapt up and scolded, "You with the surname Tai." Before he could finish his sentence, Tai Zheng's second punch had already landed precisely on the other eye socket. At the same time, a flying kick landed squarely on Yang Buotao's lower abdomen. Yang Buotao's equally burly body fell onto the throne room with a loud thud, sending dust flying everywhere. The few civil officials behind him dodged hastily. Their eyes flickered quickly. It was rare to see an internal conflict between the military generals today. Such a spectacle was too rare. Tai Zheng was unwilling to let it go, pouncing forward to press Yang Buotao down and beat him up again. Yang Buotao knew that Tai Zheng's ferocious nature had flared up. If he only attacked verbally and did not retaliate, this matter would be difficult to resolve. Yang Buotao seized the opportunity and kicked Tai Zheng's lower abdomen. The kick caused Tai Zheng to grunt, but he grabbed Yang Buotao's right leg, twisting his body to break it. Yang Buotao roared and arched his body from the ground, wrapping his arms around Tai Zheng's neck. Both of them fell to the ground. In the next moment the sounds of pow 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 rang out continuously. Both of them were thick-skinned men. In an instant the throne room was filled with dust. Qiu Jianjun and Leng Daoyin, the two old marshals, were exasperated, rushing forward to mediate the fight, but they had unintentionally restrained Yang Buotao's limbs. Tai Zheng's hands were freed and punched again and again. After a few hits, Yang Buotao's blood splattered everywhere. His Majesty the Emperor had only squinted his eyes when he heard the earth-shattering noises below him. When he opened his eyes, it had already turned into a martial arena. Droplets of blood splattered everywhere. It was a mess. Tai Zheng pinned Yang Buotao to the ground and rode on him, punching and punching like a street thug, cursing with each punch. F***ck your grandma. Bastard. I'll beat you to death. F***ck you. What is this? His Majesty the Emperor was silent for a moment before he felt the world spinning around him. When he snapped out of it, he bellowed, "Stop it!" Tai Zheng retracted his fist and retreated, spitting, "You bastard son of a b****, got off easy. Why didn't I beat you to death?" Yang Buotao broke free from his restraints and roared, springing up from the ground like a ferocious tiger, charging towards Tai Zheng in a frenzy. It was obvious that he had lost all sense of reason. Yang Buotao's military identity was no less inferior to Tai Zheng's. He had been utterly humiliated today, being held down and beaten up by Tai Zheng in front of all the civil and military officials of the imperial court. "Stop it!" His Majesty the Emperor was enraged. "Yang Buotao, didn't you hear me say stop? What kind of behavior is this?" Yang Buotao's mind finally returned to a sliver of clarity as he looked at Tai Zheng, his face covered in blood. His fingers stretched out, trembling, and pointed at Tai Zheng. "Just you wait." Tai Zheng looked back at him with a similarly enraged expression. F***ck your grandpa, how dare you threaten me? Just you wait. If your father can't beat you to death today, I'll beat you to death tomorrow. Shut up all of you. Are all of you trying to rebel? His Majesty the Emperor bellowed. The two marshals glared at each other before turning around and bowing. "This official is guilty, Your Majesty, please be appeased." His Majesty the Emperor was panting with rage, almost fainting as he bellowed, "What a disgrace! What a disgrace!" Yang Buotao looked aggrieved. "Your Majesty, this official has been wronged. This Tai Zheng has beaten this official like a mad dog today. This official has not offended him," Tai Zheng sneered, his laughter filled with disdain. His Majesty the Emperor said angrily, "Tai Zheng, why did you resort to violence in the imperial court today?" Tai Zheng said loudly, "Doesn't this bastard know what he has done? F*** King Hell. How dare he say he's being wronged? He's being wronged. He's insane. He's ungrateful. He's despicable. He's heartless. He's a bastard. Bah." Yang Buotao was enraged. "Tai Zheng, speak clearly." Tai Zheng's muscular body took a step forward. "You bastard, how dare you feign ignorance? Let me ask you what happened last night." Yang Buotao's heart sank, but he said, "What do you mean last night? This marshal was assassinated last night and the assassin was being apprehended." "Apprehended my asteriscus." Tai Zheng's white teeth were almost about to bite Yang Buotao's face. "Supreme Wind and Supreme Flame went to your residence of Marshal and announced that you're the one who framed the Nine Supremes battle. What injustice do you have left to speak of?" Yang Buotao defended himself loudly, "Nonsense. The assassins who attacked last night were obviously from Thunderclap Hall. They resented me for executing military law and killing their young lord, that's why they came to assassinate him." "Tai Zheng, do you believe whatever the assassin says? Are you an idiot? Can't you use your brain a little? Supreme Flame's arcane art of fire is completely different from Thunderclap Hall's arson art. One is internal while the other is external, their nature is different. Anyone with eyes can tell." Tai Zheng pursed his lips in disdain and said, "Executing military law and killing Thunderclap Hall's young lord? What a selfless and strict Marshal Yang. Come, tell me, what's the name of the Thunderclap Hall's young lord who served in your army? What position did he hold? Why did he violate military law and was killed by you? Come, tell me everything. I'll investigate this Thunderclap Hall's young lord and see if he's really a person and guilty of a crime." Yang Buotao said angrily, "It's been so long, who would remember such a trivial matter? If it wasn't for last night's incident, it's just a passing cloud. Whose hands haven't been stained with the blood of executing military law?" Tai Zheng said angrily, "Do you think I've never led a troop? Don't F*** King play dumb with me. The military law has always been specifically recorded. Did you King lead a bunch of mobs? Yang Buotao. You deserve to die 1,000 times over. Yang Buotao said, Tai Jing, you're being so aggressive because you're jealous of my military merit, jealous that my position is higher than yours. I know you've been dissatisfied with me for a long time. As long as I'm around, your title as the unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military will be hard to live up to. Tai Jing sneered, unrivaled man of the younger generation in the military? Forget about the fact that I've never cared about this title. Even if I did, do you think you're fit to be mentioned in the same breath as me? Tell me, what other military merit have you achieved in these 2 years? Your father is in charge of the East and you're in charge of the North. Why would I be dissatisfied with you? You're not my King's son either. Your father is dissatisfied with you? Do you think you're worthy? You're a heartless thing. Even if you were to be my son, your father would despise you for sullying my name. Tai Jing's rebuke was unstoppable. Although Yang Buotao retaliated, his aura was much weaker. His Majesty wanted to stop him, but after some thought, he could only watch from the sidelines. Yang Buotao suddenly turned to kneel. Your Majesty, please seek justice for this official. Tai Jing's mouth is filled with filthy words and he has humiliated and slandered this official in front of the court. This official is innocent. Your Majesty, please seek justice. Tai Jing roared and was about to charge forward to lash out again, but he was held back by Qiu Jianhan. Tai Jing struggled with all his might, his eyes bloodshot and the panting in his chest could be heard clearly. This ungrateful thing. He was ambushed in the battle of the northern border back then. If it wasn't for the 9 Supremes who saved his worthless life, the grass on Yang Buotao's grave would be 3 King feet tall by now. He actually participated in the murder of the 9 Supremes lords. Your father and I are irreconcilable. Chapter 244. Old Marshal Qiu hollered, Tai Jing. Be careful with your words. Such a grave crime, such a grave one. Where is the proof for you to speak so casually? As he scolded, he hurriedly exchanged glances with Tai Jing. Tai Jing panted heavily, his veins bulging, but he finally calmed down. Gritting his teeth, he glared at Yang Buotao, ready to bite him if he had the chance. Your Majesty, this old official, has come late. A panting voice came from the entrance of the hall. An old man with white hair and beard was hunched, coughing as he was helped in. It was the Empire of Yutong's military Grand Commandant, Fang Qingtian. However, this pillar of Yutong for so many years was now so old that he needed someone to support him even when he walked. On his face that was filled with age spots, there were scars all over it. They were the eternal mementos left behind by the old general's battle formation, a testament to the glory of the old general's battle formation. The one who helped old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian in was the old Grand Commandant's assistant, his prized disciple, Fu Baogua, who supervised the board of war and held great authority. Bring a chair here. His Majesty ordered. Even when Fang Qingtian sat down, he was still panting, feeling uneasy. He said, This old official is ashamed that I can't bow and was instead bestowed a seat by your Majesty. I'm extremely ashamed. His Majesty was moved as he said, Today's matter is of great importance. It's my fault for troubling old Grand Commandant to attend the meeting. My dear Minister, please don't blame yourself. May I ask your Majesty, why have you summoned this official here today? Fang Qingtian asked. His Majesty heaved a heavy sigh. The officials knew that this was the real climax of the day. All of them held their breaths in anticipation of what would happen next. Only Tai Jing was still glaring at Yang Buotao like he was looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Yang Buotao dared to meet his gaze at first, but he had turned his head away later on. Too many things have happened recently, especially the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It can be said to be the death of the Empire of Yutong. His Majesty's first words were a heavy topic. Yang Buotao's expression changed, a tinge of panic evident in his eyes. He clearly did not expect His Majesty the Emperor to bring this matter up so directly. He was greatly surprised. Before this, so many things have happened. I thought that after the Great Purge most of the spies were gone. But now it seems that I was too optimistic and now there are even more problems. His Majesty looked at Yang Buotao and said, Last night Yutong's northern troops Marshal Yang Buotao was assassinated. The assassin said publicly that it was to avenge the 9 Supremes. This is no trivial matter. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were silent, deathly silent. The old Grand Commandant's wrinkled face slowly raised his eyes, which had long been covered by wrinkles, and glanced at Yang Buotao. This glance seemed calm and indifferent, but Yang Buotao broke out in a cold sweat. Although he was old, his ambition was still there, and his prestige did not diminish as it was in the past. Yang Buotao explained. Old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian said faintly as he slowly closed his eyes. His entire body was like a rotten piece of wood, without the slightest bit of vitality. In spite of this, those who were familiar with him knew that the old Grand Commandant was using his lifetime's ultimate skill, ingenious volition. This was the old Grand Commandant's unique skill. There was rarely a record of it failing. The mystical aspect of this arcane skill was that it could listen to the slightest emotional fluctuation in the speaker's heart. In other words, any lies or falsehoods would be exposed before the old Grand Commandant's ingenious volition. Yang Buotao stood up, his head and face still stained with blood as he spoke in a hoarse voice filled with grief and indignation. Last night, I was assassinated in my residence. The assassin did flaunt the name of the 9 Supremes Lords, but everyone present knew that it was only a ploy by a scoundrel. This official's first mission in the imperial court today was to ask your majesty to uphold justice for this official, to remove this stain. Who would have thought? Yang Buotao said sadly, I was beaten up by Marshal Tai Zheng indiscriminately the moment I came to the imperial court. A few of my colleagues pretended to stop the fight, but they were actually taking the opportunity to restrain me, allowing Tai Zheng to beat me up. When the old Grand Commandant arrived and His Majesty started the meeting, the first order of business was to ask me, Yang Buotao, to defend myself. I was first assassinated, then beaten up, then isolated, and now I'm asked to defend myself. I, Yang Buotao, have joined the army since I was young. I've been at the forefront of all battles. I've gone through over 700 battles, big and small, to achieve this position. Your Majesty's boundless grace, Yang Buotao worries day and night, afraid that I can't repay your grace. In the northern battlefield, I, Yang Buotao, fought day and night. My life and death were nothing to me. Although I didn't contribute to the country and couldn't expand our territory, I made sure that our land was not lost when facing the enemy's army. To this day I'm covered in wounds, physically and mentally exhausted. Yang Buotao choked, his eyes glistening with tears. I have nothing to say about my past contributions. However, today His Majesty, the old Grand Commandant, my colleagues, the civil and military officials all think that I'm guilty, that the assassin's words are the truth. It's true that I, Yang Buotao, have murdered the 9 Supremes Lords. At this moment in this situation, how can I, Yang Buotao, defend myself? There's really nothing I can say. However, I'm passionate and loyal. I've never felt guilty. I can't be slandered like this and not defend myself. I, Yang Buotao, have a clean reputation. I can't be humiliated like this. Since I can't be tolerated by the world, I can only die to prove my innocence. I hope that there'll be a day when the truth is clear. Yang Buotao's expression was fierce, his grief and indignation at its peak. With a sudden roar, he dashed to the door of the palace. With a clang, he snatched the sword of the guard on duty and swung it at his own neck without hesitation. Yang Buotao shall serve your majesty in my next life. With a shout, the sword was already at his neck. There was a sudden flash of a silhouette. Fu Baogua, who was beside the old Grand Commandant, flashed like a phantom and grabbed the blade of the sword, stopping it in its tracks. In spite of this, Yang Buotao's neck was already bleeding profusely. A deep bloody gash appeared on his neck. If it had been half an inch deeper, he would have lost his life, and there would have been no way to save him. It was not difficult to imagine the severity of Yang Buotao's act of suicide. Although Fu Baogua had stopped Yang Buotao's suicide by grabbing the blade of the sword, his right hand was already drenched in blood. He hollered angrily, "Everything is unclear now. I only asked you to defend yourself and you're seeking death. Yang Buotao, you've disappointed me." His right hand continued to exert force, snatching the sword back and flinging it away with a swoosh. The sword was stabbed into the ground outside the palace door with a clang, still swaying. The blade of the sword was cold, blood dripping slowly from the blade. The crowd of officials looked at the long sword swaying endlessly at the entrance of the hall. Everyone was silent. Yang Buotao's face was filled with grief and indignation. Suddenly he wailed, his tears gushing like a fountain. "How can I, Yang Buotao, live in this world after enduring such humiliation? It's better to die and be clean." Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh and turned to kneel in the direction of the throne. "Your Majesty, there may be something fishy about this matter. It needs to be handled carefully. Even if Yang Buotao is really guilty, he needs to be tried fairly to uphold the imperial law. To force him in front of the palace like this, it goes against the law. Your Majesty, please reconsider." As Yang Buotao bled profusely, Fu Baoguo pleaded with tears of blood. His Majesty was moved as well, but he did not say a word. Old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian was still sitting steadily, not even his eyelids twitching. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stared at Yang Buotao with piercing gazes, their gazes icy, no different from before. Tai Zheng, on the other hand, snorted and mumbled, pretentious, disgusting. After a while, His Majesty frowned and said in a low voice, "This matter is related to the ambush of the 9 Supremes. It's more serious than the crime of treason. Old Marshal Qiu and Leng, the Grand Tutor, and the Prime Minister are ordered to investigate this matter. The Grand Commandant will be in charge of the coordination. This case must be investigated thoroughly. Don't let it go unjustly, don't let the souls of the dead rest in hatred. It's hard to distinguish right from wrong." The sudden change in the court meeting was extremely abrupt. The ministers did not even have time to react to the sudden internal strife in the military, and the civil officials did not say anything out of the ordinary. After all, to them the military's infighting was a mess, killing each other. No matter who was defeated, the civil officials would be happy to see it. "This matter has been decided. You may leave now, my ministers. The Grand Commandant and Marshal Qiu and Marshal Leng shall stay and talk to me." After the imperial court meeting, Tai Zheng snorted coldly and was the first to leave without hesitation. As he walked, he cursed under his breath, "Disgusting. Trash. What a good act. F***ck, if you really want to die, why didn't you just sever your own heart meridians? Why didn't you just shatter your own skull? Why did you have to rush to the palace door to snatch the sword and then come back to commit suicide? What the hell? Do you really think everyone is blind?" The other 2 burly generals caught up to Tai Zheng with large strides. "Old Tai, it looks like you know about this matter. Tell us about it." "I'm in a hurry," Tai Zheng said furiously. "Are the both of you blind or deaf? Are you so stupid that you can't tell? Don't you understand? If you're really blind and deaf, would you be able to hear even if your father were to tell you? Your father doesn't have time for you 2 idiots." The 2 generals said angrily, "Tai Zheng, we've never offended you. Why are you venting your anger at us? We only want to know the truth. If you're willing to tell us, then tell us. If you're not, then forget it. You keep calling yourself your father. What are you pretending for?" Tai Zheng pretended not to hear them and continued to walk. His legs were long and the 2 generals behind him were indignant, catching up to him in a couple of strides and asking again. Only then did they hear Tai Zheng say angrily, "What else is there to say? The ambush of the 9 Supremes Lords is Yutong's heartache. With the 9 Supremes Lords' remarkable abilities, if it wasn't for the ambush and the betrayal of the traitor, how could all of them be in trouble? Now that Supreme Wind has appeared personally to testify against Yang Buotao, he even wants to interrogate him. His Majesty is obviously senile and can't tell right from wrong. He even said that black and white are clear and justice is in the hearts of the people. Interrogation is unnecessary and will only disappoint the souls of the heroes." Before he could finish, his mouth was covered by the other general beside him. "You bastard, do you really not want to live anymore? Don't F***king say it in front of us even if you don't want to live anymore." Chapter 245. Tai Zheng struggled to free himself and rebuked loudly, "It's because there are too many cowards like you that the murderer can get away scot-free. Things are already so clear, yet you're still pretending to be ignorant. Follow me to the residence of Northern Marshal if you have the guts." The 2 generals turned and left without another word. They dared not continue talking to this idiot anymore. If they did, they might really be dragged to the residence of Northern Marshal to fight for their lives. However, both of them were still whispering along the way. "What Marshal Tai said isn't unreasonable." "Who said he's unreasonable? Even if he's reasonable, he can't say it so clearly. After all, Yang Buotao's identity is there. So what if his identity is high? I've long felt that something was wrong with Yang Buotao." "Forget it. Would you really dare to say this if it were today? Let's not talk about this. Say, is the Supreme Wind who appeared yesterday real or fake?" "I hope it's real. I still hope it's real. But if it's true, then Yang Buotao is finished. It doesn't matter if Yang Buotao is done for. As long as Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, Yang Buotao is nothing. Yes, if Lord Supreme Wind is still alive, perhaps Lord Supreme Flame is too. There's also Supreme Earth, Supreme Water and the rest, they might still be alive." "Let's hope so." Yang Buotao returned to the residence with heavy footsteps. He felt the road ahead was a blur, his eyes filled with gloom. Right now, he could already faintly feel that his doomsday had arrived and was just around the corner. It was already in consideration of his years of hard work that the imperial court did not detain him. In fact, before the morning assembly, this feeling had already been lingering in his heart. It was just that he had been lucky enough to stun hundreds of deicide bow archers last night that he had made a few backup plans, hoping to be lucky. However, the reality before him had proven that the 9 Supremes were too important to the Empire of Yutong. A single word from them was enough to override the countless merits he had accumulated. This was a hopeless truth in reality. Summon. Discuss. Tai Jing returned to the residence and gave the same order, summon. Assemble 50,000 troops immediately and set off to surround the residence of Northern Marshal once it's assembled. No one is allowed to enter or leave as long as it doesn't affect normal life. Pass down my order. Close the 4 gates of Tiantang City. Martial law will be enforced from today onwards. You can only enter but not leave. Gather the experts in the army. All cultivators above 5th grade stand by. Mobilize the deicide archers. Target the Northern Marshal's residence. Anyone who tries to enter will be killed. Even a bird from the outside world is not allowed to enter. Tai Jing's orders were passed down one by one. Commander-in-Chief, this, without His Majesty's Imperial Edict and without the Tiger Tally, mobilizing the troops without authorization is a serious crime. Tai Jing's advisor was filled with worry. Ever since he had followed this Eastern Troops Marshal, he had been shocked 3 times a day. Tai Jing's audacity had reached a level that made one's hair stand on end. He didn't know when his temper flared up, but in the blink of an eye, he threw caution to the wind and exploded without any rational judgment. I'll bear all the consequences. All of you just do your job. Why are you so long-winded? Tai Jing said fiercely. Sure enough, it was this sentence again. The advisor lamented in his heart. If it wasn't for His Majesty the Emperor's magnanimity like Tai Jing, he would have been beheaded and his possessions confiscated no less than 60 times over, no matter how great his meritorious service was, as long as the Emperor was so narrow-minded. All right, I'll arrange the manpower immediately. I'd rather commit the crime of deceiving the Emperor than let the person who murdered the 9 Supremes Lords get away scot-free. Tai Jing hollered, send the order to the entire army, place the 9 Supremes Lords' altars. Once the battle begins, the rolling heads will be the offering. At the same time, the Western troops' military officers who were stationed in the capital city moved at the same time. Seal the city gates. Pay close attention to the movement. Deicide archers, get ready. Experts gather, get ready to move. The Southern Troop. Assemble. From now on, wartime regulations. Everyone, even if they're going to the toilet, must report beforehand. Even if someone dies in the family, they are not allowed to go home. Lock down the entire military camp, get ready to move. Deicide archers, get ready. Mystical steel arrows, 10 arrows in one bow, confirmed to be in position. The military camps around Tiantang City were filled with a murderous aura. The soldiers were brimming with murderous intent, their faces were cold and brimming with murderous intent. Portraits of the 9 Supremes were laid out and pasted on the walls respectfully. There were 2 big tables placed in front of the portraits. One of them was filled with fruits and offerings. The other table was only covered with a white cloth. There was nothing else on it. It was completely empty. It was prepared to be used to place the heads. Huge flags were suddenly erected in each military camp in an unusually ostentatious manner. Yutong's 9 Supremes heroes are immortal. Every soldier who passed by the flags saluted spontaneously, their footsteps sonorous. The emotions of the countless soldiers were clearly surging. As they wiped their weapons silently, they pricked up their ears and listened attentively, paying attention to the slightest movement. They were afraid that they would be the slightest bit slower when the order to move was given. Every single one of them was like a taut bowstring. Once the order was given, they could leave the bowstring and shoot towards the target immediately. There were even more soldiers whose eyes were moist. It was not sadness but agitation. 9 Supremes Lords, we can finally do something for you. Once the news is confirmed, we must avenge the 9 Supremes Lords even if we have to be cut into pieces. They had been holding this in for more than a year. Once it was vented, how could it be insignificant? The northern capital city's military camp was the opposite of the other military camps. At this moment, the Northern Army's camp was filled with chaos and noise as far as the eyes could see. Countless generals and officers were anxiously trying to suppress the inexplicable unrest that had suddenly arisen in the military camp. It was a pity that their pacification, conciliation, and forceful suppression were all futile. It was not that the effect was minimal, but it was completely ineffective. There were veterans who came to the tent's entrance with cold faces. "General, is it true that the Marshal has plotted to murder the 9 Supremes Lords?" "General, is what happened last night true? Can't you give us a straightforward answer? Is it true or not?" The generals were anxious, but they knew that it was wrong to say it, so they could only try their best to pacify them. "This matter is still under investigation. The joint action of the 3 military leaders has even alerted the old Grand Commandant. Just wait for the news. The military cannot be in chaos. All of you go back and wait. Do you think we can hide the news from you? Do what you need to do. We'll inform you if there's news. I heard that Supreme Wind has appeared in the Marshal's house, saying that the Marshal is the murderer. Is this true? Go back quickly. I'm talking to you, go back quickly. Why are you so fierce? I'm asking if this is true. I'll ask even if you behead me." A veteran glared, his eyes bloodshot as he pressed a hand on the hilt of his saber. "We've been brothers for so many years, stop putting on airs in front of me. I want the truth. Is it true? Is it true or not? Insolence. What kind of attitude is this? Do you still know who you are? Are you going to pull out your saber and interrogate me?" The general roared. "I just want to hear the truth. Why can't I hear the truth?" The veteran straightened his neck, his veins bulging. "Is it true or not? If it is, forget about me pulling out my saber at you, so what if I cut you down? Do you think I wouldn't dare? Motherf asterisk cur. Even if it's true, it's Marshal Yang's business alone. Do you think someone of my rank can handle such a huge matter?" The general was already frustrated. Now he was utterly exasperated. He blurted out without thinking. "Does that mean it's true?" The veteran's aura grew more dangerous. "I didn't say that. You did say it. F asterisk CKU. UF asterisk King said it. You said it." The veteran's eyes were burning with a murderous intent. "I didn't say it. I didn't say anything. Go back, all of you. Go back quickly. Why are you surrounding your father here? Do you have any military discipline?" Seeing that he could not pacify them or suppress them, the general decided to throw a tantrum. "Your father is also waiting for news here. What's the use of surrounding your father? If it's true, your father will fight Yang Buotao to the death even if I have to rebel. Now, we still need to wait for more concrete news before everything can be set in stone. Can't all of you wait a little longer? Do you think you're the only ones who are anxious? Your father is going crazy from anxiety, do you know that?" The northern troop was seething like a pot of boiling water. "All of us in the northern troop owe the 9 Supremes Lords at least one life. If this is true, how can all of us in the Northern Army have the face to face our brothers from the other forces? Can you embarrass us to death? We'll die of shame if we're ashamed. People say that a clear conscience is the way to act. We can never be calm from now on. We have a guilty conscience. Is it true? Is it true?" F asterisk CKU. "Your father is just asking a question. Why don't you F asterisk King answer it, in front of the barracks?" The soldiers who were on duty had their heads lowered, standing there as if they were pleading guilty. They were the unluckiest. Others could still hide in their tents where outsiders could not see them, but these few who were on duty were exposed to the eyes of the public. While the inside was in chaos, the entrance of the barracks was eerily silent like a ghost town. There were already countless troops from the east, west, and south that had departed from the 3 camps, the vanguard of their weapons directed at the northern troops' camp. Occasionally, there were generals and soldiers from other designations who brought their men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks to take a few rounds. Their gazes were filled with disdain and hatred. A bearded general brought his men to the entrance of the northern troops' barracks on horseback and snorted loudly. The soldiers who were on duty in front of the barracks lowered their heads even more in shame. "I've been having a fever these few days. Sometimes I don't update in time, please forgive me. Really, it's been 4 days and I've wanted to ask for leave almost every day, but I've resisted the urge. I'm not telling you to pretend to be pitiful or anything, but just don't be led by others and scold me along with the haters." Chapter 246. A bunch of ingrates. How dare they still have the face to stand in this world? Heaven is blind. The bearded man's voice was not soft, filled with disdain. "Your father is actually a soldier with such trash my entire life. What a disgrace. The northern troop is really something. After so many years of war, they were the most useless, the ones who lost the most battles. The 9 Supremes went to help the most as well. In the end, it was these fellows who murdered the 9 Supremes, F***. It looks like they can even kill their own parents. There's nothing impossible about it, it's definitely possible. Come, let's go back. Await the order. Let's see if these fellows can still be arrogant after the evidence of their crimes is conclusive. If they still dare to be arrogant, your father will annihilate these bastards even if it means being beheaded. The bearded general finished his words and left with his men with a wave of his hand. Clip clop clop clop. A group of soldiers on duty lowered their heads, tears dripping onto the ground. They were so ashamed that they did not want to show their faces. Gradually, sobs could be heard. Outside, whispers could be heard among the troops. The 9 Supremes Lords' flags of revenge have been raised in our military base. Why hasn't it been raised here? Don't they care about the 9 Supremes Lords? Don't they want to avenge the Lords? That's the northern troop we're talking about. They're the ones who murdered the 9 Supremes Lords. Not to mention that they don't have the face to raise the flags. I'm guessing they don't even want to, at least they don't dare to. It turns out that not only is Yang Buotao a coward, even his subordinates are a bunch of cowards. They don't even dare to raise the 9 Supremes Lords' flags of revenge. I wonder if they're guilty or if that's what they think. F***, don't these people have the slightest bit of shame in them? Your father is going crazy from anger just thinking about it. The 9 Supremes Lords have saved the northern troops so many times. How can they be so heartless? They're not even human. Where does their conscience come from? It's been eaten by King Dog. Don't you dare insult a dog. How can a dog eat a black heart? Their hearts are all black. If we really fight, your father won't show mercy. I'll just take it as killing a dog. Me too. Me too. I told you not to trample on dogs. Dogs are the most loyal. How can they be compared to dogs? Exactly. In front of the barracks, all the soldiers lowered their heads and tilted their necks fiercely, squinting at their squad leader. Their gazes were fierce and overflowing with killing intent. Captain Zheng's eyes were red. He lowered his head and gritted his teeth. Wait here, I'll go ask. Go. We should have gone long ago. More than a dozen cries rang out at the same time. The captain wiped his tears, mounted his horse and rode away with all his might. General, why don't we raise the 9 Supremes Lords' revenge flag? Captain Zheng was on the verge of breaking down. He ran out of the tent and cried, our brothers from the other directions have already risen. Are we really that guilty? The general was taken aback. What flag of vengeance? It's a flag of revenge to seek justice for the 9 Supremes Lords. Why don't we raise it? Captain Zheng bawled, wiping his tears and snot all over his face. Your father has been a soldier for so many years, I'm used to seeing life and death on the battlefield. Your father has never cried in water or fire. But today your father has had enough. Your father has been humiliated to this extent, yet I dare not make a sound. I wish I could die right now. When I heard that the 9 Supremes Lords were killed, your father cut my own face and swore a blood oath to avenge them. Now, the spearhead of the 9 Supremes Lords' murder is actually directed at us. Could it be that the rumors are true? Are we, the northern troop, really a bunch of ungrateful people? Murdering our saviors. How can our brothers still have the face to live? Captain Zheng was sobbing, his tears and snot running down his face. Flag of vengeance? The general's eyes were bloodshot as well. Send a few men to check on the situation. I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going either. One of the deputy generals was appointed. His face turned red as he roared, why should I go? Why don't you go? What face do you have to go out now? Even if your father stuffed my face into my pants, it's all gone. How can I have the face to go out and face the other brothers? The general's eyes were spitting fire. None of you want to go out? Then F***ck off your father. Your father will go out and have a look myself. The general urged his horse forward. It was only the time it took to drink a cup of tea before he came back again and again. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot as he roared, make flags for your father. Raise the flags. Set up the altar. Faster. We, the northern troop brothers, are not ungrateful people. We have no cowards. If Yang Buotao really murdered the 9 Supremes Lords, the northern troop brothers will be the first to find him. The general bellowed. Once the command was given, the entire military base was in an uproar. The soldiers went back to make flags, their faces finally showing some signs of life. Gather the men. Gather. The general bellowed again. Suddenly, a troop of men came over with a cold expression. What? Jiang Chenglong, Are you trying to rebel by gathering your men privately? It was Yang Buotao's most elite janissaries who had come over. The one who spoke was his janissary general. Jiang Chenglong looked over with bloodshot eyes and waved his hand. Gather. Ignore them. The janissary general strode forward. Jiang Chenglong, how dare you make the decision without the marshal's order? It's your business if you're not afraid of death, but it's not good if you implicate your brothers. How many lives do you have to pay for it? The janissary was a quick-witted man. He knew that it was futile to suppress the situation and would only bring about the opposite effect. However, it might be effective if he shifted the threat to his subordinates. Jiang Chenglong's eyes glared as if they were about to burst into tears of blood as he said fiercely, "If Yang Buotao is really related to the Nine Supremes' murder, then he's not fit to be our northern troops' marshal. Your father will fight him with my life. So what if your father gave this assembly order on my own? At most, your father will pay with my life later and your father will definitely give this order. F***CKU. The marshal is innocent. Didn't we explain everything clearly yesterday?" The janissary general roared. "If the marshal is innocent, when the truth comes to light, I, Jiang Chenglong, will tie my own hands and ask for my own death. Gathering military forces on my own merits, death awaits. The military law is merciless. But now the northern troop must act according to my order." Jiang Chenglong roared, "As the deputy marshal, I have the authority to mobilize the troops. You're only the head of Yang Buotao's janissary troops. What right do you have to ask your father what to do? Get out of the way or else I'll punish you according to military law right now." The janissary general's gaze turned to stare at Jiang Chenglong, his hand slowly pressing on the hilt of his saber. Jiang Chenglong did not move, his gaze equally fierce. In spite of this, everyone around Jiang Chenglong roared at the same time, unsheathing their sabers and swords as they looked at Yang Buotao's Qin soldiers like hungry wolves. Only a glance or a movement was needed and it would be a huge battle. "Get back!" Jiang Chenglong hollered, "Do you really want to do this?" The janissary captain sucked in a deep breath and pointed a finger at Jiang Chenglong. "Just you wait." He turned to lead his men back. "Now do as I say. Immediately. Immediately." Jiang Chenglong's expression was steely. The janissary captain returned to his own tent with a heavy expression, only to find that an altar had been erected outside his tent. The portraits of the Nine Supremes had been placed there. The captain's gaze wavered. The janissary soldiers around him evaded his gaze. Some were panting, everyone seemed to have a bellyful of things to say. "Captain, is it true?" Finally, a man asked in a trembling voice. "I believe in the marshal. He would never do such a thing. It's all the lies of spies, they're distorting the truth." The captain said through gritted teeth. "What if it's really the marshal's doing?" Another man asked. The captain's facial muscles twitched. He did not speak for a moment. He stood straight, looking at the portraits of the Nine Supremes. Suddenly he knelt down. All the janissary soldiers' faces darkened. As the marshal's janissary soldiers, we're always at the forefront in every battle. Every time we lose, it's also when we're the most desperate and in the most dangerous situation. Therefore, every time the Nine Supremes Lords make a move, it's equivalent to saving everyone. But we're the marshal's janissary soldiers. If this is true, the entire northern troop can say that it's the marshal's doing alone, it has nothing to do with the northern troop. Only we can't say that. No one will believe us even if we say it. We're the marshal's janissary soldiers. We're the marshal's most trusted and closest people. We are indebted to the Nine Supremes Lords for saving our lives countless times, but we are also indebted to the marshal. The captain closed his eyes and said quietly, "If it's true, if it's true." His voice suddenly choked. "If it's true, no matter which side we're on now, how can we live after this?" As his words trailed off, the surroundings fell into silence. In the palace, Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian reclined on his chair, panting laboriously. His Majesty sat on the big chair in the royal study, quietly waiting for the results. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stared at the old Grand Commandant with widened eyes. After a long time, Fang Qingtian opened his eyes and said, "What Yang Buotao said was a lie. Moreover, he seemed to have prepared it a long time ago. So, there must be something wrong with Yang Buotao in this matter." His Majesty nodded calmly and said, "With the old Grand Commandant's testimony, the truth is clear. However, Yang Buotao's betrayal has become a trivial matter. The real crux should be, the tornado that appeared last night, was it Supreme Wind himself? And the one who attacked with fire, was it Supreme Flame? Chapter 247. Qiu Jianhan said, "From what I see, this is most likely true. There's indeed something wrong with the flame, but Supreme Wind can basically confirm it. It's just that it's hard to say if he's willing to show himself." Old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtang coughed and said, "Your Majesty, please don't let your guard down. Although my ingenious providence can tell that Yang Buotao is suspicious, it's not as obvious as it used to be. It's not hard to deduce that Yang Buotao might have other tricks up his sleeves. His true ability is most probably not as simple as what we've seen. Besides, he's still one of Yutong's 4 marshals." His Majesty frowned and said, "That's right. I was too naive just now. Putting aside the possibility that Yang Buotao might have hidden his true strength, this matter has been pushed to the forefront now. It's impossible to take down Yang Buotao, an important military general, one of Yutong's 4 marshals, with mere groundless evidence. It's not something that I can do alone. However, if Supreme Wind really reappears, as long as Supreme Wind is determined to capture Yang Buotao, he'll definitely appear to verify this matter. As long as Supreme Wind appears and proves his identity, Yang Buotao won't need to be interrogated at all. He'll be convicted directly and the soldiers under his command won't defend him. However, if Supreme Wind doesn't appear, this matter?" His Majesty pondered. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan said, "It's inevitable that Supreme Wind will appear. However, what we need to worry about now is actually the same as Supreme Wind's concern. Once Supreme Wind appears, what can we do to ensure his safety?" "Difficult." Old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian coughed and covered his mouth with his hand. Leng Daoyin passed him a handkerchief swiftly. Fang Qingtian spat out a mouthful of phlegm, his breath finally smoothing out. He said, "Difficult. As long as Supreme Wind doesn't appear, he can do whatever he wants in this world. However, if his whereabouts are exposed, he'll definitely become the target of all his enemies." Back then, the 9 Supremes were still about to perish under the heavy ambush. Now that there's only Supreme Wind by himself, even with Supreme Flame's help, the situation is still not optimistic. After all, the enemies they have to face include enemy countries and the martial world. There are even many spies in this dynasty, Old Grand Commandant panted and said, "It's impossible to guard against. If Supreme Wind appears, he can kill Yang Buotao, but the price is too high. The loss outweighs the gain." Old Grand Commandant coughed violently and said, "This old official knows your Majesty's intention. He wants to meet Supreme Wind and ease his mind. However, using such a method to force Supreme Wind out, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. It's not worth it. In my opinion, why don't we just cut the chase and kill Yang Buotao's family?" The Old Grand Commandant coughed a few times and said, "In this way, Supreme Wind doesn't have to show himself. His Majesty's arbitrary actions are undesirable, but it's not that he can't or shouldn't do so. If we can be sure Yang Buotao's death will be fine, but if we can't be sure, be it me or the military, we can't get rid of the stigma of killing a good man. The price will be equally huge. Grand Commandant, using the exquisite jade heart to prove that Yang Buotao is unusual, we can believe it, but it can't be used as proof. If we really do so, the outside world will only say that an unknown assassin in black turned into a gust of wind and made us kill a country's marshal with a single sentence." His Majesty smiled bitterly. "There are many follow-up issues. If we don't handle it well, it might lead to another Zhuo-Wenlong incident. Furthermore, the military of the other countries will probably make a big deal out of this, breaking down Yutong's military morale bit by bit." Old Grand Commandant frowned, speechless. His Majesty's considerations were reasonable. Acting rashly without any proof would not be able to hide the world's gossip. The Empire of Yutong was the world's public enemy. Once there was an opportunity to attack, the other countries would not let it go easily. Supreme Wind's reappearance this time is targeted at Yang Buotao. I believe he has the intention to bring Yang Buotao to justice. As long as he doesn't reveal his real face and identity, there won't be too much trouble." Leng Daoyin said, "The only thing that needs to be resolved is probably the aftermath of Supreme Wind's reappearance. Breaking away from the tracking of those with ulterior motives is the key now. I can basically confirm that if there's something fishy going on with Yang Buotao, the reason why the people behind him did not provide more support to help him get out of his predicament is probably because they're waiting for Supreme Wind to show up and use this opportunity to understand Supreme Wind's real identity." Leng Daoyin said, "Since they're waiting, they must have the means to track him down. They might even have the confidence to stop Supreme Wind from turning into a gust of wind." Just like what old Leng said, this is the most troublesome problem. The mysterious arcane skills that these people of Shanhai possess are really not something that we can speculate about now. Qiu Jianhan sighed deeply. How's the current reaction in the military camp? His Majesty asked. The military camp is boiling. It's almost out of control. Lung Daoyin chuckled humorlessly. Actually, it's not just the military camp. The entire Tiantang city is boiling. His Majesty pondered and said, this matter needs to be settled as soon as possible. Let's hold a public trial for Yang Buotao in Tiantang Square, in front of the Monument of Brave Souls. The rest of the people's eyes shone brightly. Brilliant plan. Qiu Jianhan. His Majesty said, you'll be in charge of arranging this. If Supreme Wind appears, it must be done without any mistakes. Yes. If there's any mistake in this public trial, this old official will bring my head to see you. Qiu Jianhan strode out. Lung Daoyin reminded him from behind, don't forget the 20 to 30 experts who suddenly appeared in Yang Buotao's residence when the assassins tried to assassinate him. Qiu Jianhan was nowhere to be seen. He only threw back a question, do you think I'm like you? Lung Daoyin rolled his eyes, choking on his words. The entire Tiantang city had suddenly turned into an ocean of hatred on this day. Avenge the 9 Supreme's lords. Such flags could be seen everywhere. It was the same in the military camp and among the people. Everyone's expression was somber and sorrowful. The place where Yang Buotao lived was taken over and sealed off. Every house on the street where the residence was shut down. Only Yang Buotao's family was not allowed to close their doors day and night. Other than the soldiers who came and went, there was no one else to be seen on the street. Occasionally, there would be people who passed by the end of the street from afar. They would cast a glance at the place with disgust and disdain before turning to leave. The hundreds of people in the residence of Yang still had to make a living. Although there were still food reserves in the house, they still had to purchase vegetables and meat. The military would not interfere when the people of the residence of Yang came out to purchase. The steward who was in charge of purchasing walked hurriedly with his head lowered. He had always been in charge of purchasing ingredients, so he was already very familiar with the vendors in the market. Right now, all he wanted to do was buy the ingredients as soon as possible and hide in his room. However, when he arrived at the market, the steward was shocked to realize that everything was different from before. Everyone was looking at him with resentment, like they were looking at the enemy who had killed their parents. The steward had only walked a dozen steps into the market, but he was already enveloped by a strange atmosphere. It was as if he had walked into a wolf's den with his bare hands and no strength to truss a chicken. Everyone was looking at him with an ominous glint in their eyes. Those who were originally trying their best to curry favor with him and hoping to help him were all different today. Not only did they not come over to talk to him, they even looked like they wanted to beat him up. What was even more outrageous was that he could not buy any vegetables with the money he had. Not selling. Oh, you're asking about this? This is not for sale. Why are you setting up a stall if you're not selling? Yes, I set up a stall to look like I have something to do. In fact, I'm waiting to watch the show. If the vegetables are sold out, I'll have to go back. What show is there to watch? What show? Is it worth looking forward to? Someone is going to die soon and it's going to be a horrible death. I heard it's a martial. How can I not watch such a show? There was no way to chat anymore. It was better to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale? What? Because I'm happy. Happy? What a strong reason. The manager had no choice but to go to another stall. How much are you selling these vegetables? Not for sale? What? I'm not happy. Not happy? It was the same strong reason. It was fine if he was happy and not selling, but why would he not sell even if he was unhappy? The steward wanted to question him, but he forced himself to hold back. If he asked, he might be beaten up. Normally he wouldn't be afraid, but this time, forget it, he would go to another place. Your vegetables? I'm not selling them. If I sell them to you, what will I feed the pigs with when I go home? Your vegetables? This is for people to eat. It's not suitable for you to eat. Similar answers were given, each more ferocious than the last, and each more directed than the last. The steward patiently asked around and finally found someone who couldn't resist the temptation of the shining silver and wanted to make a deal. However, just as he was about to reach out to take the silver, he discovered that everyone in the market was staring at his hand with their eyes wide open. Countless eyes were focused on him. Some were looking at him with contempt, some were disdainful, some were angry that he did not want to compete, and there were even more who were furious. The man's hand suddenly retracted as if it was scalded by fire. From the eyes of those people, he could see that as long as he sold a vegetable to the Yang family today, He would not be able to establish a foothold in this place for the rest of his life. He could not help but laugh dryly and retract his hand, saying, "I forgot my vegetables today, they are not delicious." The manager saw that he had succeeded, but why did this guy change his mind? He immediately became anxious. How is it not delicious? Isn't it the same as before? I'm mainly afraid that you will mind. The man laughed dryly. Today I peed in the vegetables. Cough, my son also defecated on it. If you don't mind. Chapter 248. The steward almost vomited. Wash it twice more? Fine. *CKU. If it had been in the past, he would have slapped the person who dared to speak to him like this, but now, he really did not dare. Even if he were to vomit to death, he dared not do it in front of him. In short, the steward had been to 3 markets, but he did not manage to buy a single stalk of vegetables. He returned empty-handed, but it was not as easy as when he had come. There was a sentry every few steps he took. Before he had even taken a few steps, the steward had already been searched everywhere on his body, not letting go of any hidden spots. After this round of searching, he would be met with another wave of searches every few steps he took. Again, all the hidden spots on his body were searched. They wanted to see if there was any news. What if the search was not thorough and they missed it? Those hidden spots were the main targets of the search. They could not be let go. By the time the steward returned to the residence of Yang, it was already the 4th hour of the night. The search along the way had almost cost him half his life. Even the gaps of his nails had been searched. Where else could he not find? There was also that, a broken anus, a body full of wounds. It was not fake at all. In the inner yard of the residence of Yang Buotao looked as calm as ever on the surface, but in reality, his heart was in a state of turmoil, and he couldn't calm down in the slightest. Surrounding him were the Four Seasons Tower's experts who had used various identities to sneak in. There were more than 20 of them. However, even though there were many people, it was peaceful and calm. To these people, the matter before them was only a trivial matter. Whether they succeeded or failed, it was insignificant. However, the significance of the current matter to Yang Buotao was very different. Yang Buotao, as a Yutong's man, had been born and raised in Yutong, built a family, built a career, and built a meritorious service. It had not been easy for him to come this far. It had only been a few days, but Yang Buotao had suddenly realized that what he had painstakingly built and fought for his entire life was about to be destroyed. The source of all this was because he had thought that he had done it carefully, a secret that no one would ever know about. His current feelings were indescribable and indescribable. Looking at the indifferent faces of the Four Seasons Tower's experts around him, Yang Buotao was exasperated. Of course you don't have to care. You can just leave this place and return to the martial world. The 4 corners of the world are your home. Anyway, you've gotten used to such a life. But me? Does anyone spare a thought for me? Marshal, Madame invites you. A pretty little maid walked over timidly. Yang Buotao coughed and said, "Did Madame say what happened? I still have important matters to attend to. If there's nothing important, we'll talk later." For some reason at this moment, Yang Buotao suddenly felt flustered and afraid to face the person who he had slept with for several decades. He was clearly bored to death, but he didn't dare to say it out loud, and he didn't dare to face her. Madame seems to have something important to discuss with Marshal. "Marshal, please come over as soon as possible," the little maid said. "Tell Madame that I'll be there soon." Yang Buotao paced back and forth, muttering to himself for a long while. Finally he sighed and said, "Everyone, please wait here for a moment. I'll be right back." A green-robed old man who was the leader said with a smile, "Marshal, please do as you please." Yang Buotao nodded and strode away. "Madame is looking for me?" Yang Buotao followed her into the bedroom. This was the most private space in the entire Yang mansion. Usually the only people who could enter this room were the husband, wife, and a personal maid who was in charge of cleaning and tidying the room. But now, in this private space, there was a small table in front of the bed. There were 4 dishes, a pot of wine, 2 wine cups, and 2 sets of chopsticks on it. I don't know why, but I'm suddenly in the mood to have a drink with my husband tonight." Yang Buotao's wife was the daughter of an official. Although she was already in her 40s, she still had a slim figure and was as beautiful as a flower. For Yang Buotao to have such a wife made others envious. It could be said to be a trivial matter and a topic of conversation. I didn't expect Madame to have such a refined interest. I'll have a drink with Madame." Yang Buotao laughed heartily and seemed to be in high spirits. He sat down and smelled the aroma of the dishes. His face was intoxicated. Madam's dishes are getting better and better. Eat more if you think it's good. Madame Yang sat opposite and raised her wine cup. She looked at Yang Buotao lovingly. My husband, please. Madam, please. Yang Buotao laughed heartily and drank the wine in his cup. He looked very cheerful and carefree, much more relaxed than his usual dignified appearance. However, he had completely concealed all of his negative emotions. Madame Yang covered her face with her sleeves and drank the wine in her cup slowly. As she drank, her eyes stared at Yang Buotao's face without blinking. Why are you looking at me like that? Yang Buotao smiled. Do you think I'm old? Madame Yang smiled gently. My husband is in his prime, how can you say that? But I looked at the moon last night and suddenly remembered that it has been 27 years since I married into the Yang family. Yang Buotao sighed unnoticeably. 27 years, so it has been that long. Since ancient times, beauties were like famous generals, they were not allowed to see their hair turn white. Be it beauties or famous generals, the merciless years were their biggest enemies that they could not fight against. This time? Madame Yang looked out of the window and said slowly, it doesn't seem to be easy? Yang Buotao shuddered and said, don't worry, madam. This incident is just a misunderstanding. Once everything is cleared up, everything will be settled and everything will return to normal. You don't have to worry about it. Madame Yang turned around slowly and looked at Yang Buotao's face gently, trying to catch his gaze. However, Yang Buotao's gaze only met hers once before he looked away and raised his wine cup for the second time. I know it's true. Madame Yang said, you and I have slept together for so many years, I know your habits. You will look away the moment you feel guilty. Especially when you're facing me. Yang Buotao remained silent and did not reply for a long time. Since the year before last, your temper has been weird and getting worse. You would always go out for a walk alone in the middle of the night. Madame Yang said, I knew then that something was wrong with you. Last year, when the 9 Supremes Lords were ambushed, you became more and more abnormal. Initially, I thought you were worried because of the 9 Supremes Lords' unfortunate demise and Yutong's fortune. However, when you personally killed the old dog that you had reared for more than a decade, I vaguely felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Later on, you would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. It only showed your abnormality. Madame Yang said quietly, I know something is wrong with you, but I won't ask if you don't want to talk about it. You're a man, you should have some space for yourself. I believe you won't hide anything from me if you can tell me. Previously, I was still naively fantasizing that you would definitely be able to tide through it on your own and adjust yourself very quickly. Mistress Yang smiled sadly. That's why I've been waiting all this while, waiting for you to tide through it and then tell me about this journey of yours. I didn't expect that I would wait for this day and that what I've waited for is such a terrifying news. Is my sky going to fall? Madame Yang shook her head and sighed. Husband, why is this so? Tell me, I want to know. Yang Buotao sat like a statue, motionless and silent for a long time. Since Madame Yang began to speak, he had not moved. However, his face grew paler and paler. When he heard the question, Yang Buotao shuddered involuntarily. Husband is a native of Yutong, the blood of Yutong flows in your veins. Since enlisting in the military, you've been on the battlefield for a long time, you've been through hundreds of battles. All the way until now, you're already second only to one and above tens of thousands of people. You can be said to be at the pinnacle of being a vassal. On the battlefield, you're the marshal of an army. With one command, millions of soldiers can die without regret. Madame Yang's voice was calm. I know how much you've suffered for the Empire of Yutong, how much you've suffered. There are a total of 135 scars on your body. For so many years, he has done his best to protect the country and fought on the battlefield. He has never fallen behind. My husband is a good man of steel. A loyal vassal of the Empire of Yutong. I'm absolutely sure of this. But it's also because of this that I'm even more puzzled. Since my husband is such a hero who deserves to leave his name in history, why would he do such a thing? Madame Yang's voice had been calm. When she finished her last sentence, she lifted her head slowly, her clear eyes looking at Yang Buotao without blinking. She said slowly, why would you plot against the 9 Supremes? Tell me. When she said the last 3 words, Madame Yang's tone that had always been flat turned into a high-pitched one. Cold sweat broke out on Yang Buotao's forehead. Tell me, 2.5 years ago, every time we talked about military affairs, you would always talk about the 9 Supremes. From the beginning, it was those little fellows, but slowly, it became the 9 Supremes Lords. It was all an indication of your great recognition of the 9 Supremes Lords. Speaking of the 9 Supremes, You were eloquent and long-winded back then, especially that time when you fell into an ambush and the 9 Supremes appeared to save you, saving the army from defeat. You promised solemnly that as long as you were alive, it would be the time to repay them. Madame Yang said, but I don't know when it started, but you stopped talking about the 9 Supremes. You didn't talk about anything else at the dining table either. As time went by, you haven't heard the 2 words 9 Supremes from your mouth for 2 years. The muscles on Yang Buotao's face twitched and spasmed, sweat dripping from his body. His expression grew paler, almost drained of color. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.